Okay, so introduction to economics, pretty much don't worry about the objectives here. Just learn to start doing that when you have a class you have to do. Economics, it's not really easy to define, but pretty much it's about making decisions. I'll get to an actual definition in just a second. But it could be where to go to college, it could be what career to choose in life, what car to buy. I mean, this is all economics. It's about making choices. And so choices are made by individuals, families, businesses, and governments. And typically the idea is to make the most efficient choice. The goal is always to make the most efficient choice. Efficiency is one of the fundamental foundations of economics. So what is economics? In more academic terms, it's the study of how people, both individually and groups, deal with the problem of scarcity. It's also how we produce, distribute, and consume goods and services. Now, we'll talk about scarcity in just a second here, but you guys familiar with the term scarcity? Maybe you were here last time. What is scarcity? Do you remember what scarcity is? Okay, so scarcity is pretty much limited resources. Okay, it's not like there's not enough iPods. That's something else. Limited resources is things like what? Water, oxygen, clean air. That's limited resources. So scarcity is about limited resources, and we're never going to get more of it. Like helium, we're going to run out of helium eventually. Unless we find another planet and tap it. In our current stage, we have a limited amount of resources on planet Earth. We have like 40 billion gallons of oil. That's it. We're not going to have any in the near future. So that is scarce or rare. Another term you guys will learn later, those people say, well, like if Apple does not make enough iPods, is that scarcity? The answer is no. That's shortage. There's a difference between scarcity and shortage, and we'll talk about the difference in a sec. Other terms, you guys may already know these, so if you don't have to write it down, don't write it down. But consumer is a person who buys goods and services for personal use. Consumer goods, products such as food, clothing, you guys know consumer goods. Elizabeth. And capital goods. So you should know the basics behind these things. I should really change all these animations. But yeah, consumer is you. Consumer goods, what you buy. Capital goods are things that are used to produce consumer goods. So these two, you should know the difference. So a consumer good might be what? Give me an example of a consumer good.
A car.
A car. So what is a capital good?
Machine. Yeah.
The car machine that builds the. So again, for example, like you could say that again, this piece of paper, this packet that I handed out to you, this is a consumer good, but the laptop used to make it was a capital good. This is actually the president packet that I forgot to give you guys last time. So basic economics, no one can have everything that they want. And so the basic idea is there are needs that are everyone needs to have. These are the necessary things for survival. And then there are wants, something you want, but you don't need it. So needs and wants are key. The problem in society today is we have unlimited needs and wants. So economics is the problem of unlimited needs and wants. We always need water, we always need air, we always want things, and they're unlimited. The problem is, when we want unlimited things, we have the limited resources to be able to meet those needs. And so economics is, again, balancing unlimited wants and needs and limited resources. Then you have goods and services. A good is a physical object. Again, cell phone, shoes, books, car, laptop. And you have services, teaching, tutoring, being a lawyer, cleaning your car, garbage collection, cleaning your gutters, that kind of thing, babysitting. And both of these can be limited, or we can have a shortage of both of these. So Allison, if there are not enough tutors in the city of Claremont, do we have scarcity? No, because that's a shortage. It's an issue of demand. So why must people make choices? Again, scarcity is the major factor here. Scarcity is the key. So all goods and services are scarce for the most part due to limited resources. It means limited quantities of resources to meet unlimited wants. Sooner or later, that thing is going to be reached. So it's all about scarcity. Economics is all about scarcity. Now, scarcity has two important characteristics. You know, if we don't have enough dog poop, that doesn't mean there's a scarce problem. Okay, so it has to have value to some degree. It must have value to someone. It must be useful to someone. And it must be in short supply compared to the number of people who want them. Which is actually a shortage. That's not true. That's shortage. But it must have value. So scarcity must have value. Otherwise, it doesn't really matter if it exists or not, because no one will care. I mean, you can have an unlimited, like if there's billions of stars in the universe but no one wants them, who cares? It's not a scarce resource then. But if you don't have enough iPods and like 90 million people want them, then that's a shortage. Likely the reason why you don't have enough iPods is because there's not enough resources, and therefore the resources to make iPods are scarce. But the iPod itself is not scarce. There's a shortage of them. So gasoline is a great example. Gasoline is a great example of a scarce resource. In the 1850s, we had tons of gasoline, and we realized that it was useless, so we just threw it out. We were trying to make kerosene, for like oil lamps, and then when we made gasoline, we're like, what's this? We don't want that. And we threw it out because we didn't see a value for it. Then in the 1890s, we developed a gas-powered car. And all of a sudden, people are like, oh, maybe we should use cars, and they're gas-powered. And so between 1850 and 1920, the thing that changed was that all of a sudden, gasoline had value. And so that's the major shift here. Once you have value, then something is scarce. If you don't have value, then something is not scarce. Again, an example is lobster. Lobster Day, like, oh my God, there's not enough lobster in the world. It's a scarce resource. But in the early colonial eras, they fed lobster to their servants all the time because it was there, and everyone hated it because lobster is a bottom feeder. I mean, when you look at, that's why in Judaism you can't eat shellfish because they're bottom feeders. You eat like the refuse that's unclean, and so there was actually several revolts in Massachusetts because they were feeding people lobster. They said that's disgusting. 3 times a week, lobster, horrible. So lobster there is not a scarce resource. It's just a factor of time as well. What is demanded. Other examples, again, clean water is a scarce resource. That's typically one of the biggest ones. Money, I guess, technically is a scarce resource, or gold is a scarce resource. Food is scarce, and of course, oil is scarce. So these are all just different scarce resources. So here's the big difference. Scarcity and shortage are not the same thing. Scarcity always exists. Scarcity is forever. Whereas shortages are temporary. And typically a shortage is a factor of price or when inventory runs out. So if Apple is selling iPods for, let's say, $10, are a lot of people going to buy iPods for $10? Sure, maybe like 30 million people are going to buy iPods for $10. But does Apple want to produce 30 million iPods at $10? That's a limited run. Maybe they'll sell 100 just to get the attention. And so there's a clear shortage there, 10 to 30 million. And so that's a temporary shortage because of price. But if Apple sells it at 600, they're probably going to get about 5 million people that buy it, and they're going to produce about 5 million. So there's rarely going to be a shortage once price is at the right point. But that's the whole issue of equilibrium that we'll talk about later. So how do you produce things? There are 3 factors of production, or 4 factors of production. First is land. Anything needed. All the natural resources needed to produce any goods. Trees, metal, water, land itself. And even computers have natural resources, the components, the metals. Then you have labor. So, the actual physical people that need to make things. And then you might say, well, what about in the future if we have robots that make stuff? Well, initially those robots still had to be made by people. And then capital. So any human-made resource to create other goods and services. So let's look at, then you have entrepreneur, which is the fourth factor. Okay, so let's look at a business model. Look at McDonald's. So Julie, what is an example of land in the factors of production for McDonald's?
Where they would place their restaurants?
Sure, so maybe the actual physical land itself, the actual space. You could also mention, the actual beef or the food or whatever else. That's all considered land resources. And so, Elizabeth, what would be a labor factor?
Workers, cashiers.
Sure. Managers, everyone working there. What would be a capital good, Nydia, at McDonald's?
The register machine. I don't know.
Yeah, the fryer, the stove, all the stuff that we bought to make the burgers, all the stuff that we bought, even the tables, the chairs, the actual building itself. That's a capital good. The most expensive capital good is the building and the machines. And most people forget that, but those are capital goods. The building is not a land resource. The building is a capital resource. And so that's something to keep in mind. And then entrepreneur, the other resource, because that's where all the money comes from. So that's where all the money is. So you need to know entrepreneur. Well, there are two types of capital. There's physical capital, like we said, the actual building itself, and then there's human capital. And then if you go into sociology, there's cultural capital. And there's that as well. So physical capital. So again, buildings, tools used to produce goods, paintbrushes, the actual building itself, the guitar, the tools. That's physical capital. Stuff. So again, when you're going to decide, creating your business, how much are you going to invest in physical capital? Again, the basic idea is this is much easier to buy a tractor than it is to, mow your lawn or whatever by hand. And then there's human capital. It's the knowledge and skills workers gain through education and experience. So your capital, for example, is going to college. So you build up your human capital, your value, by going to school. You build up your human capital by, going to professional development conferences. You go to capital by, again, just educating yourself. So a farmer is much more valuable if they read a farmer's almanac and understood kind of basic weather patterns versus a farmer that does not know that. So you're more valuable when you have more human capital. Again, businesses hire skilled workers when they want a certain job done correctly. So again, you would not want to have surgery performed by a cook and vice versa. So human capital, pretty good. If you get into sociology, then you talk about cultural capital. The basic idea of, do you know how to navigate, for example, when we talk about college and secondary education with your kids, there's always a good conversation to have about, how many of you guys know how to go to college? Like, know what the process is? And some of them may not know, and they say, that's not your fault. That's an issue of cultural capital. If you're the first person to go to college in your family, you're lacking cultural capital. But the nice thing is that you can earn cultural capital. By sitting here in this classroom and me teaching you the college-going process, I can give you cultural capital. And if you have human capital, that makes you valuable because you went to high school. Physical capital, which means you might have the actual car or whatever to go to college, the airplane tickets. And then there's social capital. Who do you know to help you go to college? And so outside of just economics, if you're talking about sociology and issues of capital, cultural and social capital are pretty big, and it kind of helps students navigate, especially if you're teaching low-income communities, how to navigate the college-going experience. Because if they don't know why they're not knowledgeable about college, ask them, well, what is your cultural capital? Have you learned about the college-going experience already? Have you ever talked about it? And two, do you know anyone that's gone to college recently? Is there someone in your family that's gone to college? And if not, then maybe your social capital is much smaller than others. Whereas, let's say all your teachers have gone to college. Well, that's a social capital network you probably should tap into. So as you kind of play with this idea of capital, you can also apply it to other things with your students. So 4 basic questions that all economies will ask when talking about the economy is, what should be produced? What are we going to produce? How many of that thing should we produce? How are we going to produce it? And how are we going to distribute it? So are we going to produce guns or butter? How much guns or butter are we going to produce? Are we going to produce guns or butter with mostly people by hand? Are we going to use some machines? And then who are we going to give the guns and butter to? But every economy asks these questions all the time. I mean, China and America, how many t-shirts are we going to produce, or cars are we going to produce? Is America going to produce a lot of cars? Are we going to do it by hand or by machine? Who's going to be able to afford these cars? you should be familiar with these 4 basic questions. They're foundational. And there's a guy thinking about economics. We talked about this a little bit last time, but trade-offs. So again, the trade-off is when you do one thing over another, right? So we talked about trade-offs last time. It can be anything. It can be individual decision-making, whatever. But the trade-off is, again, here's a more basic definition. So trade-off is something that you choose not to have, but the most desirable, again, is an opportunity cost. So the example, again, we gave you is today, you came to this. But what else could you have been doing besides coming to this class? You could have been sleeping, you could have been eating breakfast, you could have been at Disneyland, you could have been playing video games, what have you. Those are all trade-offs. But you could have also been going to the dentist, you could have also been, cleaning up poop in the yard. I mean, those are all trade-offs. But the most desirable of those, what do you guys really want to be doing right now? Like sleeping. So if you really want to be sleeping or, going out, eating dinner, going to Las Vegas right now, that's the opportunity cost. That's the actual loss here. Because yes, you could have, been scooping up dog poop in the park, but that's not the most desirable alternative. So they'll ask you, I've seen this question before on the CSET, where they'll give you a list of alternatives and be like, which of these is most likely the opportunity cost? And while it is somewhat subjective, you use the most basic rationale, like if you're going to school, what is the most reasonable, opportunity cost? Math class versus science class, English class, Disneyland, brushing your teeth. Obviously Disneyland would be the most likely opportunity cost. So if you know the basics, you should be fine. Decision-making grid then is where you start seeing marginal costs and marginal benefits of opportunity cost. So again, if you sleep late, the benefit is that you get more sleep and you have more energy during the day. But if you wake up early to study, then you get a better grade on the test. So there's pros there. Teacher and parents love you, personal satisfaction, great. Unfortunately, with benefits, you do have to also make a decision. So if you decide to sleep late, you decide to wake up early, study, there are costs. So what happens if you sleep late? Well, you will lose extra study time. If you wake up too early, then you will lose extra sleep time. So that's the alternative. And so what do you lose? If you sleep in late, you will lose a better grade, you will lose your parent and teacher approval, and you will lose personal satisfaction. If you wake up early, you will lose sleep, and you will have less energy. So in any case, folks, again, when we're talking about opportunity cost, the resource of scarcity here is a resource of what? What is scarce here in this scenario? Not necessarily sleep, but you're deciding, you have 2 choices you're making here. Time is scarce. So time is also a scarce resource. But also time is subjective. We could always just say, yes, we have a 24-hour clock, but maybe we shouldn't. There's a great book that was released last year. It's a science fiction book called The Age of Miracles. And the whole premise of the book is that eventually the Earth starts turning slower and slower. And so the days get longer and longer and longer. And eventually, one day will last 3 months. And so what is the implication of that? And then the idea is, how long can your body stay awake? If you have 3 months of darkness, what does that do? 3 months of light, straight, what does that do? It's a pretty interesting book. It was this author's first book, and it was interesting. But yeah, scarcity and time. So if you look at the margin then, if you just look at the most basics, there's also marginal benefits when you're looking at opportunity cost. Your first hour, the benefit is you get a C on the test. Great. And you lose 1 hour of sleep. After the second hour of testing, you get a B on the test, and you lose 2 hours of sleep. At the third hour, you get a B plus on the test, and you lose 3 hours of sleep. So what is happening to the marginal benefit after each hour of sleep that you decide not to sleep? Yes, it's still getting better, but how much better after each additional hour of less sleep? Exactly. So here it goes up 10% after the first hour, right? So the benefit is it goes up, let's say, 10% between those two. But by the third hour, after the third hour of sleep, it only goes up by, let's say, 3%. And so, is it worth it studying that extra hour? Some people may say yes, but the idea, though, is that it's making less of an impact after some time. Again, the thing we talked about last time is buying 1 car, awesome. 2 cars, okay, better. 3 cars, maybe not so good. 4 cars, not very convenient. 5 cars, you're paying taxes. 6 cars, you can't move them anymore. I mean, there's marginal benefits over time. I mean, eventually you're just not going to get as much happiness or benefit as you did after that first. So again, say going to Disneyland with their kids. First time, amazing. Second time, still pretty exciting. 10th time that week, you hate it. Why are we still at Disneyland? You know, let's go to a different theme park now. So I'm really fixated on Disneyland.
That's really weird because I love Disneyland and I go probably 10 or 11 times, a lot of times a year.
Sure.
I love it. I never get tired of it.
And I imagine that you can. I mean, I will eventually, but I just don't go very often. I imagine if I went that much, I'd lose my mind. I think probably it also depends. My fiance doesn't like going to Disneyland. I haven't gone to Disneyland with her yet because she doesn't want to go. It's very frustrating.
Oh my gosh, I forced my boyfriend to go.
Yeah, it's frustrating. So I'll go with like my niece. Like, let's go to Disneyland because she doesn't want to go. Oh well.
That's so sad.
It is. It makes my life is hard. So the PPF is something else that you guys have to know. The production possibilities graph. This is something you actually have to know how to graph physically. So the production possibilities graph.
Is this like a supply and demand graph?
A what?
Is this a supply and demand graph?
No, that's something else. I thought I was like, what's a subline graph? You know something I don't know. Like, I don't know enough economics. No, so PPF is just about what an economy can produce. It talks about efficiency, growth, and cost. So just know those 3. It's about efficiency, growth, and cost. And it talks about the PPF, or the production possibilities frontiers, and why they're all curved. Oh, sorry, I'll go back. This was the first thing I learned when I was in econ in high school, and like it's my favorite thing because it's simple, but it's like it's so simple, but it shows so much. I argue it's a very good foundation to economics in general because it's simple. We'll get to the graph in just a second.
The first thing I learned was there's no such thing as a free lunch.
Huh?
The first thing I learned was there's no such thing as a free lunch. That's the only thing that stuck.
And then the club next door was giving out free lunches, giving out free pizza, and then you called them out. It's good. Okay, so first off, the PPF is about the foundations of trade-offs. So you guys know that in an economy, you can choose between producing 1 or 2 things because limited resources are scarce. So in an economy, we can't produce everything because if you want to produce, let's say, I don't know, potatoes versus corn, you can't produce 1,000 of each, okay? Because you have 1 plot of land. If this plot of land can either produce 100 potatoes or 50 corn, you can't produce both 100 potatoes and 50 corn, right? Because you only have a scarce amount of resources. So it's about trade-offs. And so the PPF will show what is the maximum possible in any economy in different combinations. So I'll show you what that looks like in a second. So here in this case, it's watermelons and shoes, okay? Because assuming that you can have a piece of land that can produce watermelons and shoes, in one scenario, you can produce 15 million shoes. That means you use all the resources of your economy just to produce shoes, okay? And at the maximum, you could produce 15 million shoes. Okay, but let's say your society decides, well, we want not just 15 millions of shoes, we want some watermelons, but we still want more shoes. So you say, okay, fine, we will produce 14 million shoes, but by losing 1 million shoes, we're able to produce 8 million watermelons. So what is the opportunity cost of not producing 8 million, right, what is the opportunity cost of producing 8 million watermelons? 1 million shoes, okay. Then it goes on and on and on. After all those combinations, this curve here, this is called the PPF. That's your production possibilities frontier, because that is the maximum your economy can produce at any combination. That's your PPF. And so when you're looking at the basics of an economy, here you can choose to produce 14 million watermelons, but you can only produce 12 million shoes. Can you produce 14 million watermelons and 15 million shoes? No, because you don't have enough resources. So the PPF talks about it's a basis of scarcity because you only have so many resources.
So I didn't get the whole, like, how did you decide it was that point and not any other?
So, wait, what do you mean? Oh, sorry.
Did you pick a specific point?
No, this entire graph.
Oh, okay.
This entire line. So, this line right here,
Oh, okay.
that's your PPF. The entire line is PPF. And so you have good A and good B. And at any point on this line, your economy is producing at maximum efficiency. Excuse me. I'm sorry, productive efficiency.
Will it give us data to graph, or?
They won't necessarily give you data to graph, but they will ask you what is a PPF. So a lot of the time they will give you definitions. They might show you a graph and say what would happen if. And then they'll say, so in a basic economy, in a PPF, what would happen to the PPF curve if the economy loses 10 million workers? And then you have to know if the graph is going to shift inwards or outwards, that kind of thing. So let me explain. So, on this graph again, okay, there are 4 different possibilities of what can potentially happen here. If your economy is, let's say, producing at point Z here, then your economy is underutilizing. Because, are you producing as much as you could? No, let's say right here, you're producing 7 million. Let's say you want to produce 7 million shoes. So, sorry, 7 million watermelons. So how many shoes should you be producing? Like 14.5 million, right? But you're not. Instead, you're only producing 6 million, which means your economy is underutilizing. This is inefficiency. So if ever you have an economy producing underneath the PPF, then you're underutilizing your resources or your economy is inefficient. Okay?
So they're not going to ask us to graph.
No.
Should we know how to?
You should know how to graph because it might be, they're not going to, your answer will never be to graph. But it's an implication that you should know what this graph looks like because they may not give it to you.
Yeah.
So you should have a PPF and be like, okay, this is your economy. What happens if? And then you should know whether to shift it in or out. Or they'll give you some scenarios like, would this point be allocative, productive, or they might give you a graph and say, what type of point do you see on this graph? So I'll give you an example. So if Z is underutilized, then anything out here, point X here, anything outside that graph is impossible. It can't happen. There's no way you can produce that because you already are producing at maximum efficiency on that PPF. So anything above this, you can't do. So they might ask you, which of the following points is impossible to produce? And then you will say point X. So that's a potential graph question. The other one might then be, so let me do the other two and I'll show you what a shift would look like. Allocated, so anything on this line then, anything on the PPF, that's all productive efficiency. Anything on the line is productive efficient. A, B, C, D, E, F, because at any point are you being efficient? Yes. Now, the last one then is allocative efficiency. Allocative efficiency is this. If your society wants to produce 14 million shoes and 12 million watermelons, what point is your society going to be producing at? At 14 million shoes and 12 million watermelons at point C. That is allocative efficiency because that's exactly what the given society wants to produce. So allocative efficiency is the specific wants and needs of a government or society. That's allocative. What do the people want us to allocate? They want 14 million shoes, 12 million watermelons. So allocative efficiency is the wants and needs of a specific society or government. So you guys get the 4 definitions? Okay, so efficient, allocative. Now, is point C, if it's allocative, is it productive? Yes, it's also productive. All allocative points are productive points, but not all productive points are allocated points. Okay? Utilize, blah, blah, blah. So your economy can now grow. So let's say technology is introduced to the U.S. economy. Well, then it'll shift to the right because are you now more efficient? You can now produce more with the same amount of resources. So again, let's say I had a piece of farmland the size of this classroom, and I decided to farm it by hand. I might be able to produce, let's say, 7 barrels of corn at the end of the year. But if I had a tractor or a horse, then I could produce maybe 80 barrels of corn. So the basic idea is growth will shift it outwards. Okay, so they'll ask you, what would happen to a PPF if they introduce technology? Then you would have to answer, your options might be, it would shift to the left, no change, shift to the right, that kind of thing. So that might be the also. So then you would just, either you didn't know in your head it shifts to the right, or you'd be like, oh, it'll go that way. So that's what
So it's not going to say shift outward. We would say shift to the right.
Yes.
To the left.
Yes, so there is a directional shift. It shifts to the right. The reason why it shifts outward is because, and especially even when doing supply and demand, is that when you have supply or demand, if supply shifts this way or this way, it gets confusing. So it's not upwards or downwards, it's left or right. It's always left or right. It's never up or down. We'll talk about terminology. So it shifts to the right, okay? So this is in situations of shifting to the right. Let's see, is it here? Nope. So things that might shift it to the right are things like an economy, growing technology, population, more labor. That'll shift an economy to the right. What if there's a drought? Shift to the left. What if there's a nuclear bomb that destroys all technology? Shift to the left. So that's the basic idea. So if you guys can shift it left or right, then you guys should be good with PPF. The other thing you should know then is the law of increasing costs. Again, here it costs, when you produced 14 shoes, you produced 12 million watermelons. But when you produced 18, sorry, I'm going to do the other way around. When you produced 14 million watermelons, you produced 12 million shoes. But when you produced 18 million watermelons, you only produced 9 million shoes. And so as you produce more and more watermelons, it costs even more shoes. You actually lose more and more shoes each time because it's just a law of increasing costs. But you guys get that?
So as you increase production more of one item, then
you will lose more and more of the other one. Because I mean, think about it this way. If I'm going to start up my first business with just basic resources, I might be able to produce 500 hamburgers. And that's pretty good. That's on my first go. But if I buy a second employee, I'm still going to produce 500, but maybe that second employee will help me produce maybe 200 more. The third employee will only produce 100 more because I can only do so much with the space that I have. So remember, my space is still limited. I still have scarce resources. So my one employee will be able to make 500. 2 employees will be able to make 700. 3 employees will be able to make 800. So as you get more and more employees, those employees get more and more inefficient, or at least less beneficial. So if you start taking away less employees, that first one, that's okay if I lose them because I only was making 100 more. If I lose the second one, well, I was making 200 more, not so bad. If I lose the third one, I lose 500 more. And so that's the idea of increasing costs. It's the other way around of increasing benefits. It's the flip side, it's increasing costs. So you just have to look at marginal benefits and marginal costs. When I gave up one guy, I only lost 100. When I gave up 2 guys, I lost 300. When I gave up 4 guys, I lost 1,000 because that one guy was pretty much the meat of my entire business. And so if you're a real estate agent, you can probably run it on your own. Hire 2 guys, that's to get extra business. 3 guys, you're getting greedy. 4 guys, you're hiring your nephew. And then if you lose your nephew, no big deal. Lose the other guy, you still have the 2. Lose one guy, you can still run your business. But you lose you have no business. So increasing costs and benefits. And it's on the flip side. Okay, so that's the first. Any questions about PPFs and production possibilities and all that stuff? Okay, let's move on to the next one, economic systems. All right, so basic economic system is an economic system is used by society to produce and distribute goods and services, and they have goals and values. So the goals and values are pretty much the PPF we just studied before. On this basic line, oops. On the basic line of a PPF, this might be the goals and values of society. This might be the goals and values of America. This might be the goals and values of China. 3 economic questions. We already talked about this already. But again, how do you satisfy needs and wants with limited resources? We really should rephrase as unlimited needs and wants with limited resources. That's really, again, the foundation of economics. What opportunity cost is society willing to pay? So again, we talk about this all the time. And so again, we want to spend $600 billion on military in exchange for what? Education, in exchange for Social Security, and that's a choice that we as society have to make. How much should you devote to military spending, education, public health? So these are the questions that we as a society have to decide, and we do on a daily basis. And apparently, recently, Congress decided on our behalf that one of those decisions would be to sequester 2% all across the board. And sequestration is because they decided not to come up with a compromise on the budget. In order to reduce the government deficit and the debt over 10 years, they're going to cut 2% all across the board of all agencies, of all sub-departments, of all sub-sub-departments, which is not good because, again, the example always used is they're using a machete instead of a scalpel. You know, instead of just cutting the ones that they can easily cut, they're saying 2% just all across the board everywhere. And the reason why this is so difficult is that Head Start, for example, the program for pre-K and kindergarten, they're going to have to cut. And so in some schools, like, they're going to have to lose 70 kids. And so how do you tell a family, I have to give up 70 of you? Whereas at the same time, the IRS have to give up, let's say, 5 employees, but which is worse on the economy. And the society and what the sequestration says, it doesn't matter. Everyone has to lose. So instead of the IRS maybe having to give up 10 people instead of 5, they give up 5, Head Start gives up 70, and they say that's an equal cut across the board. Everyone has to cut. The military is also having to cut 2% across the board. And so this is going to be over 10 years. And so the problem is this creates instability in government, and it's not good because the government's now going to have to stop the government's not going to be able to keep its promises on its contracts because they're just going to have to cut contracts, which is not good for the government because the government is supposed to be a guaranteed buyer.
But when someone else takes power, like president becomes president, couldn't that change?
Not necessarily, because this is a decision between Congress and the president. So if Congress changes in the next 2 years, that's a possibility. Also, if Congress decides to end the sequester by passing a continuing resolution or a new bill, then we might be able to prevent it, and we can actually stop the sequesters from actually going forward. Because technically it begins, well, last night. It began last night. And so whether or not those cuts will actually go through will probably happen over time. Either way, though, it's not good. It actually will likely, if it continues, it'll likely lead to a second recession. Because if 2% across the board for the federal government, I mean, our budget's like $1 trillion. And so 2% of $1 trillion is pretty massive. I mean, that's what, furlough days? I think it's like, 15 furlough days a year or 30 furlough days a year, which means that's 30 people that don't have a month's worth of pay for some people. That means they're not contributing to local economies. That means that people are getting laid off. And that's not even the main people. If the military, let's say, is just going to cut contracts, that's fine because the soldiers will still have jobs. But what about Northrop Grumman and Boeing that have to lay off their employees because they have no more contracts? And all the people that make the parts for Northrop Grumman and Boeing, they have to lay off their workers. And what of all the local businesses that are providing food and coffee and whatever else to those local employees? They're going to lose business. So the government's policies largely impact what's happening. And so when we get to monetary policy and fiscal policy, you'll see why sequestration is such a bad idea. But the idea was sequestration was supposed to be such a bad idea that there's no way it was going to happen because we were going to come to a resolution before that. And so it was kind of like the doomsday clock. And then we got to it and nothing happened. And so we are where we are. In any case, how should goods and services be produced? Again, this is simple stuff. Are we going to produce it with electricity, oil, solar, nuclear, food? Are we going to do large farms or corporate farms? Teachers, 50 students per class or 25? That's what we're talking about. How? Who gets it? So is it going to go to the rich, the poor, that kind of stuff? And how are we going to get the money? So how are we going to pay our people? Factor payments is payments, so just wages. So there are different 4 kinds of factor payments that you guys should know. Factor payments, if you're a landowner, you get rent. If you're labor, then it's your wage or salary. Capital is more like what banks get, so they get the interest, and entrepreneurs, they get the profit. So it's rent, wages, interest, profit. But this is how money flows in the economy. So here's how sequestration will affect all these payments. So this is the foundation of all money in the economy. If we sequester and cut government budgets, then people won't get any wages, so people will not get paid, which means they won't be able to invest. If those businesses fail, banks won't get their money back. All those people that invested their own personal money, they won't get their money back, and they'll stop investing. And then, if your business fails, you won't be able to pay rent. Sequester will affect all types of factor payments. So we get to this idea of scarcity. Who gets the heart? So this is always a fun activity about scarcity in the economy. Doctors must make difficult decisions about who should receive them, who should be first in line to receive heart transplants. If the following two people needed transplants and there was only one healthy heart available, which should receive it? So let's talk about Robert and Nancy. Robert is 56. He has suffered from heart disease for 5 years and has been waiting for 2 years for a heart transplant. He is married, has 2 children in their 20s, and 1 grandchild who was born last month. Other than his heart, he is in good health and has an excellent chance of recovery should he receive a heart soon. Nancy is 24 years old. After several operations to repair her heart, her doctors have told her that she needs a heart transplant. Nancy is single with no children. In addition to her heart problem, she suffers from diabetes, a treatable disease that affects her blood. These are our 2 options. In your assessment, who do you believe should receive the heart?
Nancy.
Why Nancy?
I always I watch a lot of House, so every time I see this kind of show, I feel that Nancy because she's younger. Robert already lived his life. Yeah, who are you to say that he doesn't have more? But I feel that she's only 24, and I know I'm gonna be 23. If it was between a 56-year-old man and me, I would want it because I'm you already lived your life. Let me live mine.
Okay, fair enough. Anyone want to advocate for Robert? You all think that Nancy should get it?
I see both sides.
But you have to choose one. But you're the doctor, though, so you have to choose one. So does anyone here would?
I'll fight for Robert.
Okay, so why
to be the devil's advocate?
So why should Robert get the heart?
Because he has a family. Nancy doesn't have a family. He would want to, see his children, raise their children, see his grandchild grow up. He's been waiting for 2 years.
So there's the social factor. Okay. Anyone else want to advocate for Robert? We are the panel that's going to decide who gets the heart here, which is what happens in real hospitals. So, again, I have 2 people for one for Nancy, one for Robert. I need to hear from both of you, and I'll be the tie-breaking vote if necessary.
Well, Robert says he's going to have an excellent chance of recovery should he receive a heart soon. And it doesn't say what Nancy's chances are of recovery after she receives a transplant.
Okay. So you think that Robert should get it?
Yeah.
Okay. Julie, what do you think?
Nancy should get it.
Okay.
For the same reason that she said.
She's younger, therefore.
She's younger. She has longer life to live.
Okay. I'll give you the economics perspective. Robert is 56 years old, so he's older, but likely he has a higher position in a career somewhere, or he's established networks, he's established social networks, economic networks, and so if Robert dies, likely he'll lose his job, which means the business that he's worked for likely 10 years will lose all that investment, so the economic investment is lost. Secondly, he's probably a breadwinner that makes a lot of money at the current time, which means the economy will lose all the income that he makes and the contribution that he makes. Nancy, on the other hand, while she is young, and yes, there is a potential for her, she might be a college graduate and she might be able to, to be a very highly paid person, it's likely that her impact on the economy is less likely at this moment because she likely hasn't been producing that much yet. In either case, they're both good candidates, but the argument that most economists would make is that Robert would have a much larger negative impact on the economy if he dies than Nancy.
But he's about to go into retirement in 9 years.
Right, but he might not, and 2, it's the social investment and the human capital invested in Robert. If he dies, all that time we spent investing in his education, in his training, in his professional development is lost. Plus, imagine he could raise his children and he could, push that, pay it forward. Whereas Nancy, the argument is that potential is always there. So, she has a life, she can do all these. So you can always make that argument. But if you look at at this moment right now, who has more capital? You have to look at Robert. Robert has more capital. If Robert is a breadwinner in his home and he can no longer pay his house payments, his family can't make his house payments because he dies, and he has children, whatever, to take care of, then they will lose his house. If Nancy's 24 and let's say she lives at home and is renting, then if she loses her home, it's not going to ruin the U.S. economy. Someone else can rent. But if a home is lost, that's going to have a much larger impact. And so I'm not saying these are good reasons. I'm just saying it's the economic factors that have to play in when you make these decisions. Whenever you come to a more serious situation, when you weigh in on things like if there is a mother who's pregnant and the child, I mean, a lot of people would argue, save the child, the potential's there, there's a life is lived. But if you look at the economic factor, the mother should be lived. The mother should move on, because a mother has a much larger impact on the U.S. economy and on social. Like, we all know the mother. We're all friends with her. We don't know the baby yet. And so when you look at the economics of it all, and it's the capital that's built in there, not excluding all religion and life and choice and all and the implications of that, just on economics alone, the implication of a mother dying has a much larger implication on the economy. Now you can say, well, what if that kid was like Einstein? Well, okay, but we don't know that. I mean, that's something that we can't argue. And so with the information in front of you, you always have to look at, what is the capital invested in that one person? Human, physical, whatever. What do they own? What do they contribute? And so, yeah, I mean, and most transplant commissions won't look at the economic factor behind it. They'll look at, who will have a better life, the moral implications, whatever. But you do have to look at that when you're making other decisions, that there are more than just who's old or younger. The economic implication is huge. So like, if you look at who should live longer, like my niece or like my mom. My mom, gets paid good money as a nurse. My niece doesn't make any money. She doesn't buy anything for the economy. She buys mac and cheese, periodically throughout the year. That's not going to contribute to the U.S. economy. So it's just one of those things where economics is cold. It's just it's just straight cold. It's not. You don't care about people's feelings. Society wants economy to be efficient, make the most of resources, use minimum amount of resources to get maximum amount of goods. So again, if you have a piece of land and it could get 15 million shoes, you don't want that land to get you 12 million shoes. You want to use the maximum amount of possible. And then make sure to deliver goods to consumers, because otherwise, what's the point? Economic freedom, again, basics of just like, freedom from government intervention. So you could produce whatever you want when you want, and this is largely the foundation of America today. You can produce whatever you want, because the reality is, if you're producing something that's bad, then are people going to buy your good? No. If you're producing like candy with poison in it, then people will die, and then people will learn, and they'll stop buying. So why regulate the government? Because it's not my fault that you ate my candy and had poison in it. You should have done your research. I was clearly putting candy in my poison all the time. But no, so you chose not to do that. And so the freedom does vary from nation to nation. The argument here in America is we have complete freedom, whereas in China it's completely regulated by the government. But that's not true. China's far more capitalist than we are. Because in America, we have all these progressive reforms. So like, we can't just sell food that's been like on the floor. We highly regulate the food industry with the FDA. Back in the 1920s, when Upton Sinclair wrote The Jungle, we wrote about how meat was being produced in these factories piled high, and it was really dark, and pipes were leaking on the meat, and you could sweep your hand across, and there would always have piles of rat feces, and then you would scoop the meat into the hopper where they would grind it, and you would see rat feces and rats and mice, and you would just scoop it in, and you grind it together, and you'd be like, whatever, that's life, this is how we do it. But you can't do that here anymore. But you can in China, because they're not regulated. They're far more capitalist than we are. They have no regulations. And yet, they're a communist. So they're communist in government, but they're capitalist in nature. And there's actually an article in the Christian Science Monitor, I think this month or this week. It's an article about Mao's capitalist communists. I tell my students all the time when we talk about China, China is not a communist country. When I was there, it was pretty capitalist. And so the government and the pride is communist, but what they're actually doing is very, very, very capitalist. There's no way. Whereas in America, we're socialist. And people are like, oh, we're not socialist, we're capitalist. Really? Because I'm pretty sure that when the police come to your house, you don't have to pay them. Or when you go to the library and you borrow a book, that's free. Or when you go to school, you don't have to pay for it. That's all government service. That's public education. We're a socialist country, whether people like it or not, because we've been for the last, 90 years now? So I always think it's interesting when people say that no, socialism is bad, especially when teachers say that socialism is bad. Because I'm like, but you're a public school teacher. I mean, I have several colleagues that say that socialism is bad, but you're a public school teacher. You're here teaching. Is it in your assessment that we should just take the people that can afford education because they have money and just teach them, and then not give everyone else a fighting chance? Or are you, I mean, because it's pretty hypocritical that you're taking a paycheck from a socialist government. You're like, I don't agree. Okay, but that's what you're doing. So I think that's interesting. Anyway, economic security and predictability. Goods have to be available. We must be made in time. We also have to provide a safety net because people don't like the unknown. So again, this is the role of government in the economy. The government will intervene. The safety net, of course, will be things like welfare. What's that thing that intervenes during hurricanes? FEMA, as part of the economic security, that kind of stuff. And economic equality, we try to promote a fair distribution of wealth depending on who you talk to. Do we do that? In a capitalist country, you say no. You don't do that. You know, it's survival of the fittest. You know, if you're not rich, it's because you're stupid. If you did not get rich, it's because you're lazy. If you didn't get rich, because, that's your fault. All you need, again, the Horatio Alger myth of the 1920s is, all you need is hard work, honesty, and a little bit of luck. And you'll be as rich as Andrew Carnegie. And you'll be a millionaire. That's all you need. Hard work, honesty, and a little bit of luck. That's the American dream. That's the American expectation. Not considering things like racial barriers, gender barriers, class barriers, all those factors, historical barriers. I mean, we just completely forget all those things. But the basic foundation of the American dream is you should be able to do this. And so socialism is bad because, the reason why your kids are not doing well in school is because they're lazy. It's not because, society doesn't want to hire them, because they're Latino. It's not because they don't hire them because they're black or give them jobs. It's because they're lazy. That's why. How will money be divided? Should everyone get the same? Depends on how much we produce. These are just questions of economic equity.
So this is a term, economic
equity. Yeah, economic equity. So pretty much it's just what do we do with the money that we have in the economy? So do we want economic equity? And how much equity do we want? Is it okay if 30% control 60%? Is that better than 1% control 60%? Because again, to some degree, we, even as Americans, even if we want socialism, the reality is I don't want to get paid and have the same resources as someone that, picks up dog poop. I argue that the human capital I've invested, I should get paid more. And I like to think that I want to show off that I've worked harder. And so the idea is, do we have some unequal distribution of wealth? And some people say yes. But unequal doesn't mean it's unfair. So there is this idea of fair distribution. Should it be 1% controls 1%? Well, that's communism. Maybe 1% controls 10%. That's a little bit better. So you have to decide as an economy, what does that economic equity look like? And then the government promotes economic growth and innovation. I'll write everything down here. But again, we promote jobs, we promote technology. How do we make the economy better? So we'll talk about economic values. So let's talk about types of economic systems now. So what are the 4 economic systems? Traditional, markets, centrally, and mixed. So let's get to those. The first economic system is traditional. Again, don't write everything down here, just get the gist of it. But traditional economy is the following. It's pretty basic. It's based on customs, religions. You get to have the most money because you are the matriarch of our tribe. You don't get as much because you are the grandchildren of the matriarch, therefore you get the last of the goods. So if we go on a buffalo hunt today, you will get the finest furs and then we will get the scraps. That's a traditional economy. You don't really change. It's basically a family unit. Usually there's gender lines, hunters and gatherers, the women are farmers, men are hunters and gatherers, that kind of thing. They're small and mostly they're agricultural. I think there's one more. Yeah, they don't adopt to new changes or technology because it's a traditional economy. They don't know how to adapt or to change or to adjust accordingly. You still have some of these today. Tribal cultures throughout the world will have these indigenous populations, the Aborigines, like that one Indian, that one island off the coast of India where like they haven't had contact with the modern world for like 10,000 years. You know they still have those, right? The civilizations just have not had contact at all. At all. Like they're just completely isolated because of water or mountains. Like in somewhere in Latin America, I forget which country, there's a tribe that lives at the top of the mountain, and it's just so completely isolated because you can fly on top of it, but then there's not enough space to actually land. So maybe a helicopter is the best option. But yeah, they've been isolated for like what 10,000 years. It might, I forget which way. It might be Chile. There's an island off of Sri Lanka where they're completely isolated, and we've seen photos of them. And what happened was that a fishing boat kind of crashed on there, and so they ran out. They started attacking them with poison-tipped spears. So all those people were killed, and so they tried to recover the bodies, and they flew a helicopter over, and they began throwing their poison-tipped spears at the helicopter. And they just think like it's a demon god or whatever. And so, I mean, there are civilizations even to this day that are just not at all advanced.
And why is that particular community isolated?
Yeah, so there's geographical barriers. So like they're completely isolated by ocean, by mountain, by river, by lake, whatever. I mean, there was a group in Siberia that have been isolated for 90 years that had no idea that World War I, World War II, or the Soviet Union ever existed. They were just in isolation just because they're in the middle of like the tundra and no one ever goes out there. So they were just living with like, whale oil and didn't know that computers were a thing.
They're not aware of like the outside world at all.
No, not a, like
they
no.
Think that it's just them.
It's just that, yeah, they had no idea. And then one day they were just like an exploration, just like a convoy, like, oh, well, just stop here real quick. Like, the hell is this? And they were just shocked. And so, yeah, I mean, this still happened today because, I mean, the world is huge and we don't bother to, like, check every single inch of it. And so with satellites, we are now finding more and more locations and islands. Like, I don't think we ever mapped that place. And so, I mean, technically there are still places we're still discovering today, but they're like tiny islands and we're shocked to find people there, It's interesting. I mean, it's shocking. Yeah, so one advantage is that there's a little conflict between members because there's very little to argue over. You only have, like, 5, pieces of corn, so everyone gets one piece, that kind of thing. But they're restrictive, and it's a community. So you don't really get to get what you want. You get what everyone wants. Then there's market economies, like what we have. Economic decisions are made by individuals, so we don't act as a group. We act as one. So we all do what's best for us. It's based on exchange or trade, associated with entrepreneurship. Private ownership. So really the foundation is individual decisions and private ownership. And then this. So let's just worry about individual decisions, private ownership, and a price determined by supply and demand. Whoops. Does anyone know who this guy is?
Oh, that guy.
Yeah. He has the hair. He's with the eyes.
Adam Smith.
Adam Smith. You know what he wrote?
The Triangle. I don't know what he wrote.
Wealth of Nations.
The Wealth of Nations.
That is correct. Wealth of Nations. This is a packet I'll give you guys. It has Wealth of Nations on the front because of all the economic documents you guys need to know. Wealth of Nations is the one you guys have to know. So I just included a excerpt of Wealth of Nations in there. I would just read through that and familiarize yourself with it. There are 2 or 3 questions on the bottom there just to kind of give you guys, a question for discussion to make you understand it. This packet just has some random stuff in here. It'll just help you graph. We'll talk about all these things over time, but it's just basics of economics here. There's a lecture here about stuff that we'll read as a group later, and there's some extra graphing. It's mostly just graphing stuff just so you guys have practice, but most of the content will be in the PowerPoints. So that's market economies. You guys have market economies here. The goal of the market is profit, and then again, it's promoted by Adam Smith and the Wealth of Nations, so you should know that. Most market economies are capitalism because the goal is to acquire capital. Then there's centrally planned economies, in which instead of individuals making decisions, who make decisions? Centrally planned economies. Government makes decisions. Now, because that's okay. So, communism is not necessarily a centrally planned economy, but it is in that the people are the government. Does that make sense? And so you can say that communism is a centrally planned economy because the government is the people. But centrally planned economy is not necessarily the government. It could be a dictatorship that just tells everyone what to do. Okay, so it's decided by centrally planned planners. They decide everything. They're not concerned with what you want. They're going to tell you what you get. So again, in communism, they say everyone gets a gray car because that's what everyone can afford. But dictatorship may be everyone gets a black car with my face on it because I'm awesome. Okay, so that's, communism is not necessarily, communism is a centrally planned economy, but centrally planned is not necessarily communism. Way around. Very little variety one can buy. Communism is the best example, but again, dictatorships are also a possibility. Again, who is this guy? Karl Marx. Or Santa Claus. And then you have mixed economies. Mixed economies are just a combination of both. That's pretty easy. This is what we have today. So we have some private freedom, but we also have some centralized planning, and we have some government ownership. So just on the bottom part. And Japan became a mixed economy because we took it over after World War II, and we told them, this is what you're going to do, and we'll protect you. Cool. So why do markets exist? What is a market? It's the place where you can buy and sell stuff. So that's pretty simple. But specialization is when you, again, get really good at one thing. So you concentrate. We do this all the time. So, for example, America specializes in things like military goods, large aircraft. So even though America buys a crap load from China, because they specialize in cheap production of goods, items, whatever, we specialize in aircraft production. So for every, let's say, 10 million iPods we buy from Chinese manufacturers, we sell them 3 planes and we're square. Because the plane that we sell them is like, what, $1 billion? And then they sell us, $1 billion worth of like 1 million iPods or so. So we end up specializing in this. Same thing as like, Costa Rica is really good at producing bananas. And so we might buy bananas from Costa Rica because they're the best at it. So it's about specialization. What ends up happening is that when a country specializes, it's known as comparative advantage. Because America can produce bananas too, but are we the best at producing bananas? No. And so it might cost us, let's say, $1,000 to produce 10 bananas, where it costs Costa Rica only $10 to produce 10 bananas. So should we try to produce our own bananas? No, let's just buy it from them. They have a comparative advantage because they can produce at a cheaper price because their climate is better or their soil is richer, whereas we might have a comparative advantage on making cars. We have the industry, they don't. So comparative advantage is the global context of why do markets exist. In a free market, here's how money flows. It's pretty simple. You have the monetary flow and the physical flow. Here's the product market. Households pay firms for goods and services, so our money goes to the business. And in exchange, they give us goods and services. That's the product market. That's how we make money flow in that sense. In the labor market, in the labor market, we give them our labor and they give us wages. So, usage job is something as simple as this. Cool. A market can be self-regulating because of the invisible hand. You guys familiar with the invisible hand? Again, the idea is the market will regulate itself because everyone's self-interested. So again, the example of candy with poison in it. I'm going to be a business that makes candy with poison. How long am I going to stay in business? Not very long, because do you guys want to buy candy with poison in it? No. So the market is self-interested. You're not going to buy my stuff because I'm killing you. And so the market will regulate itself over time, because you say, hey, don't buy his stuff, it's poison. So eventually people will stop buying my stuff. It's regulated. Because again, is there also someone, maybe Julie, selling candy that doesn't have poison? So you're going to buy hers instead of mine. The market regulates itself. And so that's called the invisible hand. It's not anyone specifically doing it. It's as a society we just know. The other example is things like, look at tablets. Okay, so Apple had the first tablet, and so people bought that first. But then, Samsung came out with one, Dell came out with one. And so the market said, hey, that tablet is too expensive, and the Samsung one is almost just as good, and it's half the price. And so I want to save money as a self-interested buyer, and there is competition, so I'm going to buy that one. And as more and more people make that decision as a society, the market will regulate itself, and Apple will eventually have to reduce its price by like $50. So the market self-regulates.
I feel that Apple always keeps its price high. I mean, just because we're using Apple, because people are going to want to buy Apple.
Right. So so Apple knows it, but Apple can't charge $1,000. Does that make sense? So you're right. There is a premium on Apple. So Apple can still charge much higher because it's an Apple product. But at a certain point, competition will prevent Apple from charging as much as it wants. So Apple can charge, let's say, $700, even though the product only costs maybe $500 to produce. But if Dell is producing a tablet that costs $500, yes, Apple can still sell it at $700 because the Apple brand is worth $200. But Apple cannot sell it at $1,200 because there's competition. So you're right. There is a factor of brand loyalty, a factor where it's just better just because it's Apple. It's just better because it's, the Pepsi versus Albertsons brand soda. I will pay that 30-cent premium. But Albertsons brands or Coca-Cola cannot charge $3 because there is an Albertsons brand for 99 cents. So that's the idea, but you are right. And so the advantages of the free market, well, we are more efficient because you know that someone is going to produce it for the right price. If you are producing it, let's say, if you're producing tablets for $100 a piece, and I'm producing it for $300 a piece, and I want to compete, am I going to have to make my production more efficient? If I'm producing at $300 a piece, I'm not doing a good enough job. I need to figure out how to make this better, to make yours $100. And if you want to jump into the market and you wanted to beat a $100 person, you have to figure out how to produce that at, let's say, $90 a piece. And so because we're openly competing, we have to be more efficient. We can't just sit down and be like, I must be good with $300. So economic efficiency is the foundation of the free market. It's not the government saying everyone charges $300, because if we do, is anyone going to try to make it better? No. I'll be happy with the $100 profit that I'm making, or whatever. Economic freedom, you do have choice. So again, you can buy the Apple product for $700 if you want to, or the Samsung product for $500 even if it's not as good. It also prevents innovation because, again, Samsung makes a tablet PC, or say Apple makes a tablet, but Samsung says I can make a tablet with a laser pointer. Oh, so now you have made your tablet better by innovating. So economic growth creates innovation and additional goals. This is whatever society wants as well, on top of the free market. They might say, and we want to cure cancer. Okay, so let's make tablets that can cure cancer. Let's do that. So now we have centrally planned economies. So everyone go to the free market. The free market's pretty basic. In a centrally planned economy, Soviet Union being a good example, things are not as good. Pretty much the government owns both land and capital. That's the basic idea. And they decide what to produce. Then there's socialism and communism. In socialism, there is a political philosophy based on the belief that democracy means that everyone should distribute wealth evenly throughout society. That sounds like America. We should distribute evenly. Again, not equally. It's very different. I know it's a small change in terminology, but evenly, not equally. So again, 10% of the population can still own like 30%, so long as the other 70% own the other 90% or whatever. Communism, however, is everyone is equal and the government controls everything. The government controls everything. So socialism still has an element of democracy where the government or communism does not. The Soviets, for example, controlled agriculture, they controlled industry, and they told consumers what they could and couldn't do, and the quality of everything sucked. Because, did you have a choice of what to buy? No. And so if you don't have any choice, I'm not going to try to make it good. So I'm going to start making toasters that catch on fire. Because I don't have to fear competition. I'm the one producing all the goods, and you can only buy from me. The problem with this also, though, is that you're going to produce as much as you want, not as much as society wants. So you know what? I'm the government. I'm going to produce 10,000 toasters. Society wants 12,000 toasters. You don't care. It doesn't matter to you because you're going to produce whatever you want. And if you don't get one, too bad. I produce what I want. As a result, in most centrally planned economies, you have shortages. And again, not scarcity, shortages, because there just wasn't enough for the people at that time. If you had a better government, you wouldn't have shortages.
Soviet Union only made things that everybody needed. So for women, they didn't make like tampons and stuff.
That's likely. I mean, the reality is, if they were going to make a shirt, they'd make one kind of shirt. Or maybe 3 kinds of shirts. But that was it. You're going to make a toaster, you make the one toaster. You make a car, everyone drives the same car. Because again, they're focusing on building, we're going to produce like 90 million types of missiles, but we're going to produce one kind of toaster. Because that's how we proved to the world that we were making it. Again, they were not producing good. They were producing like just cloth pants made out of like burlap sacks or whatever. And so blue jeans were a huge commodity in Russia at the time. You could sell blue jeans. You buy here for like $5, sold there for like $50. There was a black market for jeans because they weren't producing enough of it, and they were like cool.
The government would allow that to happen.
No, they wouldn't allow it, but I mean, they would crack down, get the smugglers, that kind of thing. I mean, they tried to fight the black market, but the reality is the government knew that their economy was terrible.
Oh.
I mean, they knew that they weren't producing enough, and I mean, once you start seeing the reforms of the 1980s, then you start seeing, it's called glasnost and perestroika, and you start opening the government, but it's not good. And there's modern economies, which are mostly just mixed economies. So you have limited laissez-faire. You guys know what laissez-faire means? Yes. Yeah, so non-intervention. So laissez-faire is French. It means literally to let to do. Laissez-faire, to let to do. So the government is not involved, but we limit it. So there is some government involvement in a mixed economy. So it's not complete freedom anymore. Like in America today, we have some government intervention. We can't just like Google, Microsoft, and Apple merge. Because then they would dominate the entire world. They'll tell us everything. They will tell us what to buy, and so you don't have that. So there is some government regulation, but they do try to promote innovations with patent laws. So they will create some monopolies. In a mixed economy, the government does buy and sell to some degree, so that way they are involved. So this is the one that we have today. So our purchases and our costs, so again, we buy things from businesses like planes, militaries, tanks, that kind of thing, and we hire households to be able to do things like be our labor. Like, we hire workers. So the government is one of the largest employers in America.
So an expenditure is?
A cost. A cost. So, in a free market, the government does not get involved at all. Who pays, if you want to go to school in the free market, you as an individual have to set up a school and get students to come to you, and they pay you. Imagine just all private schools and all private colleges in America. That's a complete free market. Here, we don't have that. The government actually has to buy land. The government has to hire teachers. The government has to hire textbook companies to make textbooks for them. So that's where we have a mixed economy, where we do have private schools, but we also have public schools. And so the expenditure for the government is what do we have to pay in our part in society.
Is there any country at all that?
No, it's really impossible. Because again, it's impossible because the government has to provide some services. And so if you have a government that just votes on stuff but doesn't provide any welfare, doesn't provide any military, it just doesn't work. You can't have that. Unless you have, this will work if your government is like 10 people. In all honesty, it's an economy of scale. If you have a very, very, very small group of people, then communism will work and you will have no government. It does work if you have like 5 people, 10 people. But when you have a government of more than 1,000, automatically it fails. So, it's unrealistic. Free market is ideal for some, but it's also survival of the fittest, and so it appeals to our human nature if we are just completely self-interested, stuck on an island, and we just want to fight for survival. But because society has evolved and now we have civilization, this is typically where most people converge to. And that's how money kind of flows in also. And the government gets its money back in taxes. So again, how does the money get its money back after it bought all those things from firms and households? Taxes. That's how they continue to buy things. So you have different mixed economies today, on this graph. So again, the US is here, we're a free market, whereas China's here. But that's not true, those actually should be switched. But again, Hong Kong is more of a free market, Singapore is more of a free market. But again, they still have some government involvement in this graph here. Okay, you guys want to take a quick break? 10-minute break? And then we'll come back. So again, Hagel Burger should be open if you guys want a quick snack.
Were you able to email out the PowerPoint?
No, I'll do that right now, actually.
So they are open now?
Yeah, they should be. They should be open right now.
Did you see that New York Times article about weight loss or weight gain in women? They did this study that's like, why are women so much heavier than they've been in the past? It's because they don't do as much housework. And everyone's like, way to go for publishing that, New York Times.
Well done.
Real good. Not only are you calling women fat, but you're saying they should be doing more housework.
It comes back like every 40 years.
Yeah.
The cult of domesticity, it returns. It does. I mean, that's the philosophy behind it.
My biggest issue is, like, I like to watch the cooking shows, like, but all you see is, like, the chefs are male. But yet, back then, a woman's place was in the kitchen.
No, there's Anna Garten. I like watching Anna Garten.
I mean, most of them, like, the majority of, like, women always say, like, men are struggling to be head chefs or executive chefs. I'm like, but you're supposed to be in the kitchen according to society.
Okay, when you're watching those cooking shows, though, it's because it's a foundation of competition. You know, like, if you're just watching just like a basic cooking show, like, whatever her name is, an Anna Garten, yeah, like Anne Burrell, and they're pretty cool. And I like not Chef Zakaria, the other one. I love Food Channel. Anyway, let's not talk about that right now. Let's talk about American Free Enterprise. And so this is obviously the foundation of our government. We'll talk about some of this. You don't have to know all of it. We'll just hit on the key basics. The government's supposed to protect our economic freedoms. Again, the whole idea of free enterprise in our government is that the consumers have freedom and choice, and so we just want to make sure that we promote that regardless. You know, that you can choose to eat at a restaurant with a male or female head chef, and up to you. So that is a choice that we have in the society because we have free enterprise. If you had a government-controlled, dominated government, you might say only women can be head chefs, right? But we don't have that. We have choice. There's also public interest, and so the government will promote laws that promote the public interest. This is called public policy. Interest groups will get involved as well. Don't worry about any of this stuff. This is not interesting or important. But here how we try to regulate. So don't write all this down, but here are just some examples of us trying to regulate the economy. The FDA created in 1906 after that disgusting story of, what is it? Yeah, the meat story. So we passed the Food and Drug Act, which created the FDA. The Federal Trade Commission, they're supposed to make sure that we protect against antitrust laws. So the FTC. So again, like if Google tries to merge with Apple and Microsoft, that's not going to happen. If Verizon wants to merge with like AT&T, that's not going to happen. With Sprint, that's not going to happen. The FAA is supposed to regulate air travel because, you know, United Airlines can just do whatever they want and maybe not check this. You know, those Boeing planes that, like, you know, are not currently working right now, the Boeing Dreamliner, they're so big, like their batteries are catching on fire. If the FAA didn't exist, then maybe they just would let those all fly and people would die and we would learn, oh, so clearly the Boeing 787 Dreamliner doesn't work because people have died. And again, that is the free market. The free market suggests that you stop using things when they start killing people. And in a natural free market, that's when we would decide that the Boeing 787 is bad. Instead, the FAA gets involved and says, before we kill people, let's fix this problem. But that's not free market. That's a government intervention. And so that's what's happening here. Equal opportunity employment, you know, we should just hire men or women or whites or blacks. The government says, no, you have to be fair. They're all equal. EPA, you know, businesses should be able to, I mean, if a business is being really efficient, they should be able to pollute wherever the hell they want. just to make, Apple products would probably be like 10% cheaper if they didn't have to worry about, pollution and, factors and having to prevent, poison in the water. But because they have to worry about those things, then they have to, charge higher. OSHA, for example, like I have all these cables running on the floor or whatever. I do in my classroom also. So if OSHA ever came into my classroom, I'd get in trouble, or the school would get in trouble, and they would say, hey, you can't do that. You have to provide ceiling-mounted projectors so that there aren't cables running across your classroom. And I'm like, yeah, that's too much of a hassle, whatever. It costs too much, but OSHA would regulate that. Consumer product safety stuff, you can't have like, poisons in your candy, and of course, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, civilian control of nuclear weapons, currently right now San Onofre. I tell you a story about San Onofre? Okay, so I work on nuclear weapons and nuclear research with my students. So we went to San Onofre last December.
On the way to San Diego.
Mm-hmm. And then so we visited because we were doing research on nuclear power plants. So we went inside, we did the research, and we actually, the research paper was on nuclear safety and security. I'm like, oh yeah, no, it's super safe and whatever else, and we always do all this maintenance. And a month later, they're like, it's been leaking for like 3 months. We're like, what? We were just there. And you told us it was safe. So we thought it was really interesting that it happened to us.
Growler said those things used to have a green glow.
No.
When they were years ago.
No, that's not true at all. Radiation, radiation doesn't glow. There's no glow that comes off. That's just like comic books that tell you that. But there's no glow off of radiation. I'll give you a piece of uranium, you wouldn't know, you'll just die. But you wouldn't see any glow coming out. Yeah, the radiation will kill you. If I put a piece of uranium in this room, we'll all be dead. But we're not going to see anything coming off of it. So radiation will kill us. Just like when you get an X-ray, you don't see like green things coming off of it, because on the visual spectrum, you just can't see it. So, but no, science and pop culture tells us it's green, but it's not. The Simpsons tell us it's green. Uranium is actually like gray. It's not anything interesting. The safety net, we also try to fight poverty. So again, poverty threshold, income level, we all know this. Welfare. So be familiar that we do try to prevent everyone from living above the poverty level. This is why we want everyone to have a living wage and not just a minimum wage, which is why Obama promoted an increase of 20%, because there are some states currently that offer a minimum wage that is below a living wage, which is crazy to me. Because why are you paying someone that is not enough to be able to live on? That's nuts. But
I've read that book, Nickel and Dime.
No, but I've heard of it.
It's really good. It's this woman, can I survive on minimum wage? And she gets a job as a waitress, and she gets an apartment and all this stuff, and she can't do it. She just can't. And she ends up doing drugs and stuff, and
yeah, and then you end up being on the government welfare because so they say welfare is bad. Well, then pay people more. I don't understand how. And welfare does cost us a lot of money. It's expensive. But if we increase minimum wage, then you would reduce welfare, and you'd actually have a stronger economy because you're giving. It's demand-side economics. The basic idea is if you give people more purchasing power, then that demand for more goods will create more jobs. But if we lower minimum wages, then yes, businesses may not be able to invest as much in more workers, but over time, as more workers have more purchasing power, you will have more jobs. So.
What's the resistance and why they know that?
Because there's supply-side economics and demand-side economics. Supply-side economics says the businesses should have more money, and therefore they can invest more. But the problem is that with supply-side economics, it always forgets the fact that people are self-interested, and even though you give businesses more money, they're not necessarily going to invest it. They're not going to invest it in the business, they're going to buy a yacht for themselves. So while that will create some business, I guess, the issue is that people want profit, so they're going to buy $1 million house. And so the best example is this. The reason why demand-side economics, in my assessment, is better is that if we had $1 million and we gave Elizabeth $1 million, and we do supply side, we give her $1 million, she's going to buy one really good car for $1 million. And that creates how many jobs? 5? But if we give us, divide that $1 million into $250 each, we might buy 4 cars, and that'll create 16 jobs. And that car is marginally better. And so supply side suggests that if you give it to the one investor, it'll go and it'll trickle down over time to the workers. They say the business owners are supposed to create jobs. The other side of it is that we as consumers will create jobs if you increase purchasing power. That over time we will create jobs because we buy more, we'll demand more iPods and computers, and that'll create more factory jobs. So they're both right. The problem is that parties want to do one or the other, which is stupid. Fiscal policy should promote both demand side and supply side economics. But when you have a party system like we currently have, where there's so much vitriol and everyone's so angry at each other, you can't really reason with common sense and say, we have to do supply side because demand side is terrible, demand side is too slow, supply side is the only way to go. And the answer is no, you're both wrong, you need a combination of both. But with the economic political climate that we have, we just don't have that. It's just stupid. And I likely argue that most of the people have no idea what they're talking about anyway. I mean, in reality, they don't. It's the lobbyists telling them what they should say. Because in the short term, yes, supply side will largely benefit businesses and their owners. In the short term, no one really benefits from demand side. In the short term, there is a slow benefit. It takes time for demand side to take effect. But it is a much larger benefit over time. So, yeah. Society. Redistribution programs are also known as cash transfers. So how do we get money to the people that need it when they are lacking, if they're being nickeled and dimed, as said? Well, we have TANF, which is temporary assistance for needy families, Social Security, unemployment, and workers' comp. So the TANF is typically for families that are low income, food stamps, that kind of thing. They're on free or reduced lunch. So typically, many of you will end up working at Title I schools or schools with a large population of free or reduced lunch. Our school is like 87% free or reduced lunch. And so most of my students that take the AP test, they get the reduced fee, which is still a lot. I mean, the AP test today is $89, and reduced fee is $57. It's still a lot for kids, but it's still cheaper than before. But they get free or reduced lunch. Social Security, of course, to the elderly, that's something new since 1935. Unemployment insurance, also new in 1935, and workers' comp, that's more recent, like no, that was old also. That was like 1940 something. Yes, exactly. It doesn't count if you quit. It's a fire termination, and it also it's not indefinite. There's like I forget what it is now. It's like I forget what the set term is, but it was like 99 something, like 99 weeks on unemployment because they extended it because of the recession. Before it was like 60, and then they extended it for another 39 weeks. But that's a long time now to find a job. Other redistribution programs, in-kind benefits and medical benefits, and of course, education benefits. So other ways to kind of just promote the economy. These are just promoting cultural capital. So again, this is why we have a socialist government, because we do things like educational benefits. We do provide Medicare, Medicaid, Medi-Cal. And then in-kind benefits, these are things like subsidies. Farmers will give farmers subsidies in order to grow crops. We'll give you a subsidy in order to put solar power on your rooftop, that kind of thing. Good with that? Okay. Then providing the public good. What is a market failure and externalities? So you should know what a market failure is. So a market failure is when the market fails to provide for the needs of the public. That's a market failure. This happens all the time. So, for example, would the free market ensure that roads are built everywhere they are needed? The answer is no. What's the worst place you can think of? Like, where would you never want to live? Anyone here? Just like
off the 15.
Okay, Barstow. Yeah, okay, fair enough. Barstow off the 15. It's not a very good place to live. Hesperia, Apple Valley, whatever. It's just not a great place. No, kudos to the people that live there. Your troopers for doing that. But I agree. So, if you're a road builder, private company road builder, would you build a road to Barstow? Would you build one? I wouldn't, because likely very many people would not live there, and if you even charge the toll, then fewer people would use it. Because you're not going to make any money off a toll road to Barstow, because the people that live there because they have to, and if there's a toll road, they're going to find somewhere else where they have to live. So the free market is going to fail the people of Barstow. Does that make sense so far? And so because there's no economic benefit, but we still have to provide for the needs of the people, the government has to step in when there's a market failure, where the market does not provide for the needs of the public. And because, again, it's doubtful that neither could afford to pay for the free, because we can't build it ourselves as citizens of Barstow. We can't afford it. We already live in Barstow. Clearly, there's a reason we live here. And so a market failure is a situation in which the market on its own does not distribute resources efficiently. By the way, my apologies to anyone that lives in Barstow and is currently listening to this lecture online. But that's the case. A market failure is where the government has to step in because the market cannot provide the resources efficiently. So, what do? You create a public good. And a public good is a shared service which would be impractical to make consumers pay individually and exclude. So one, it's a public good that's they get paid individually, but two, it's to exclude non-payers. Pretty much, it's in the public sector, and you have free riders, which means people can use it even if they don't pay for it. It cannot be divided, and no one can be excluded. Okay, so you can't be divided and it can't be excluded. For example, roads. Did any one of you specifically build a road anywhere here in the United States? No. And again, if, let's say, you don't pay taxes, does that mean you can't use roads? No. You can still use them. And so a public good is a good that is non-divisible and it's non-excludable. So you can't say, this is my part of the road, this is your part of the road. That's a public good. It can't be divided. You don't own a part of the road. And it's non-excludable. You cannot say you cannot use any part of the road. Okay?
Like a public school.
Yes. You cannot exclude anyone. And it's not divisible. You don't own part of the school. You are just a part of this whole school. And so any public good, roads, schools, government, the Veterans Administration, Social Security. I guess Social Security, you don't own part of that. What's a better example? Medicare. These are all basic goods that the government offers so that everyone can benefit. Because if we didn't do this, then private businesses would not open up schools in poor neighborhoods because poor neighborhoods wouldn't be able to pay for it. So why bother? So the government steps in because the market fails. Okay, and market failure is a subjective term because in pure economics you'd be like, no, it didn't fail. That's economics. It's just not efficient to build there. But because the government has an interest in the public and our welfare, you have the creation of public goods. So again, this is a factor of American enterprise because you don't have free market here. You have some government intervention. Then there are externalities. So there is a cost and benefit to doing something. The economic side that benefits or causes something to happen. There are positive and negative externalities. So pretty much the outcomes is another way to look at externalities. So what were the unintended things that happened? I guess sometimes they're intended also. But the building of a new dam and the creation of a lake generates a possible source of hydroelectric power. Swimming, boating, fishing, and lakefront views. Nice. Negative externalities, loss of wildlife habitat to flooding, disruption of fish migration, overcrowding due to tourism, noise from racing boats and other watercraft. We did not expect that. Look at the construction of Three Gorges Dam in China. That created jobs, awesome. It created a lot of power for China, awesome. Negative externality, it destroyed like 300 villages because the water level rise by 750 feet. Yeah, and so they just and so you can, like ancient cities too, so you can actually still go diving into the bottom of Three Gorges Dam and you can still find like treasures because the problem was the water level rose so quickly, and despite us warning all these villages that it was going to happen, they still refused to leave. And so over a period of a month or so, this water level just rose, and people had to evacuate. And you can still go diving into Three Gorges Dam if you don't get caught. And you can still find just like homes and buildings just there, now like overrun by like, I guess not coral, but like algae and whatever else. And you can still find like artifacts and whatever else. So yeah, the Three Gorges Dam had a huge environmental impact in both positive and negative ways. And people were pretty pissed off about it. And in fact, that was one of China's biggest fears, was that the frustration with the Three Gorges Dam that still exists today, because I think it was completed in 1993 or 1990, it's recent. There's a huge frustration from the public about how your benefit, like the loss of like 3 million homes was supposed to benefit, of course, like the benefit like 1 billion, but still, is that what a government should be doing? And
Well, why did they build the dam?
because the river was so powerful that they wanted to generate electricity from the Three Gorges Dam. They wanted to harness the power of the river in order to power electricity because they need it. They just needed electricity for that entire southeastern region or southwestern region. So they said the benefits outweigh the costs. The be able to provide electricity for 380 million outweighs the loss of like 3 million homes. Sorry. And when you look at economics, there's numbers. So it's externalities. And then promoting growth and stability. So there are basic terms. Macroeconomics is a study of the decision of economies, versus microeconomics is a study of decisions of who? So macro and micro, there is a difference. So macro is government economics. What is microeconomics?
individual?
Not even local, but it could be individual. It's more like business. It's studies of firms. The term firm just means company, but they'll always refer to firms because company, enterprise, corporation, they're all firms. So macro is a decision of a government as a whole. Micro is the decisions of firms and sometimes individuals. But that's a firm. A business cycle is a contraction, high lows, peaks, troughs of an economy. And GDP is the gross domestic product, pretty much what an economy produced in your economy that year, your GDP. We measure this. A GDP should be growing at about 2% every year. In the last quarter, we grew at like 0.2%, so we are not on track for our average GDP growth. We are growing, but very slowly, very, very slowly. And likely, if the sequester continues, we're going to go and reverse GDP, and our economy will shrink, which is never good.
Well, it's because it's mostly outsourcing, or most goods that we're using are being produced in the United States.
That's part of it. But then even with that though, GNP does measure the gross national product, which includes production. Well, not the stuff that's made outside, but if Coca-Cola sells stuff in like China and Mexico, that counts towards our GNP. So you're right, the GDP affects what's being produced domestically here, and that is an issue, and we are outsourcing. But the idea is, when we outsource those jobs, we should be able to replace it with something that is not maybe of equal value, but we should still be innovating our company. And the reason why we're outsourcing is because of comparative advantage. We cannot produce t-shirts at a low price anymore in America because of wages. And so we outsource that because China is better at producing t-shirts. We as a country have to produce something better for those people. Like we have to produce tires, and create more jobs creating tires. Or we have to educate our populace so that we can have more people, be lawyers or doctors, and that would improve the service economy. So the shift that is difficult for America right now in the last 50 years is, should America go back to a manufacturing economy or a farming economy, or should we truly shift to a service economy where we provide banking services to the world, we provide legal services, and academic services, where we be the hub of innovation versus the hub of manufacturing? But it's hard because there's an expectation that, again, not everyone wants to go to college, that there is some value in doing some of the work that we do with hands. And so we have some weird conglomeration of all of those. But you're right, the GDP is falling because we're outsourcing, but the expectation is macroeconomics should try to replace those jobs with something else. Through fiscal monetary policy, we should try to mitigate that somehow. Maybe increase real estate, do something there.
I have a question for first in the test. Is it mainly macroeconomics?
It's mainly macro.
Oh, okay. My school taught me micro.
Well,
Only.
yeah, well, did you take AP Micro?
I took AP Econ, and they focused, the teacher, he's like, we're only going to focus on micro.
Right, because you can take AP Macro and AP Micro. And so if your school only offers one, they usually choose one or the other. You probably still learn some macro, just like in macro you learn some micro. But there is a little bit of both, but it's mostly macro because you're focusing on the large government level. Because if you learn just what a firm does, you won't know what an economy does. And so it's mostly macro. So what we're covering all is macro stuff. You will see some micro stuff, but again, if you really want to know both, you can buy those crash course books. There's one AP Micro and one AP Macro. Yeah, there's one macro and one micro. And they're not very long, so if you wanted to, you can just touch on these real quick and they'd be pretty good. Economic strength. So how do we promote economic growth in our economy? Maximum employment would be good. You want to promote growth and stability. So that's how you promote strength in an economy. Your economy should never shrink. It should always be growing, which is why we have inflation 2% every year. And people say inflation is bad, right? Not really. Inflation is actually good. If you have inflation, that means your economy is growing. That means that you're paying people more. In the 1940s, people were getting paid like $5,000 a year. By 1950, they were getting paid 10, and by 1960, they were getting paid 20,000. So your inflation went up by what, like 400%? But that's okay though, because that means people are getting paid more. But the economy did grow. So it's one of those things where inflation is good if it's controlled inflation, not like 9,000% inflation like Germany, where like people had nothing. We encourage innovation. That's one of the major things that we do to try to grow the economy. So how do we replace that loss of GDP through manufacturing? Innovation. Let's make airplanes awesome, and China buys them from us instead of us making t-shirts. So So yeah, innovation is pretty big. Okay, so that's American free enterprise. Everyone cool with that? Okay. Business cycle. So you guys are asking about this. This is your basic business cycle. Typically, it's a 20-year cycle. The reason we know this is, again, like I said before, we have an economic recession about every 20 years. Again, it goes 17, whoops. It started off in 1789 with the end of the war, then 1807, then 1819, then 1837, then 1857, then 1872, 1892, 1907, 1929. I mean, it's just every 20 years, give or take a few. And it's because of over-speculation. People just don't know that the economy's going to get bad, so they think, oh, I should buy all these things right now because the economy's doing so well. And, you know, people think, oh, this is too good to be true. And it is. It always is. But the economy never learns. People always over-speculate, and they assume there's no way the economy can get worse now. This is not like what happened 20 years ago, except it always is. Always caused by over-speculation. Every single time the economy is tanked, it's because we got too greedy. Housing, gold, steel, railroads, internet bubble burst in 1990, housing bubble burst in 2008. It's always over-speculation. People assume, let's buy. What's the worst that could happen? Oh, right, the economy can tank.
So are we in a recession now?
Yes, we're currently in recession now. We are like here. No, I would say we're like here, and we should be here, but we're not going to go back down. So pretty much what ours looks like was about 2008 is where we were, then we tanked, and we were going back up, and we're likely going to go back down before we go back up again. We're going to have a double dip. If we get out of the sequester, then we'll have a regular. But a double dip recession is never good. And it won't really go that bad. I think it's more like this. It'll be like, whoa, and then down, and then up again.
How long does the recession last?
It really does depend. I mean, fiscal and monetary policy can make a recession end quickly. Also, I mean, the quickest way to end a recession, go to war.
Really?
The reason why we pulled out of reason why we pulled out of the Great Depression is World War II. Maximum employment. I'm not talking about not small. I mean like a big war. Because you have full employment, everyone will have a job. The entire economy is pushed towards one goal. We don't have that right now. Everyone is unemployed, self-interested, whatever. There's no common goal.
But aren't we in a war?
It's not a big war. It's not by any means is it a big war. If you talk about our debt, between 1941 and 1945, the U.S. debt grew by $210 billion. That's money back then. I mean, $210 billion today is still a lot. That's a third of what we spent today. But now imagine that in American dollars. That's like, what, $15 trillion that we spent in those 4 years? If you talk about, America, nominal dollars today. And so it's one of those things where if you really want to get out of recession, go to war. Because also, you're not going to deal with unemployment. The government's going to pay for all those people. And the people say, well, won't the debt increase? I'm like, yeah, but you know what we're going to do? We're going to borrow from us in the future. We'll pay for that now. And when the economy inevitably grows, because then we'll pay for all those soldiers to come back, they'll have more income, they'll buy more things, the economy will grow, and then when we pay all that money back in taxes, the government is going to pay itself back. Now, I'm not advocating war, but the reality is that's one of the best ways to get out of a recession, is to go to war. I mean, so we've always thought, should we go to war this time? 1990, the internet bubble burst, should we go to war? We went to war in Bosnia. Now, that was not because the economy was bad, it helped. And so it's just one of those things where that's how it happens. It's a pattern set by growth in GNP. It includes 4 phases. Again, GNP, the reason why it's GNP, not GDP, because it also includes profits from across the world for American companies. That's why it's GNP, not GDP. What are the 4 phases? Expansion, peak, contraction, and trough. So expansion is when the economy is recovering and getting better. It's growing again. And then it peaks. You're like, yay, the economy's at its most. There's no way this could get any worse. And actually, you never know when the peak happens. The peak is always in retrospect. You never know when you hit your peak. You always assume you're in expansion. That's why we get crazy. We're like, oh my God, houses are selling for, what, 300 million? If I buy a house today for 400 million, then naturally it'll go up to 800 million. And then it does, and so you're like, oh, if I buy a house at 800 million, then likely it's going to go up to 1,600 million. And then it doesn't, because it's not going to reach that way forever. That's what happened to the housing crisis. People just got greedy, and so they started buying and buying and buying. Like, it's okay if I put 0% down. How can I lose? The housing market is only going up, and I'll buy for like 5 years and sell for triple the price. And then it didn't happen that way. And banks were over-speculating too. I'll give out as many loans as possible because these people are going to pay me back anyway. They're going to make money on the homes, they're going to sell it, and I'm going to make all my money back. Oh, wait, that's not how this works. You're over-speculating again. And you should have learned the last... How many times have we over-speculated now? Like 24 times that it's happened in our U.S. history. And so it's frustrating for me because I'll tell the kids, I'm going to bet you the next recession is going to happen in 20 years. And then we teach, oh, when was the last time we had a recession? About 20 years ago? Oh, that's right. Did someone tell you that was going to happen? Oh, I did. I told you that. Because it happens, and it happens every 20 years. It really does. Talk to me in 2028, and we'll see where the economy is. And if there's something like, oh my gosh, we're going to build space elevators, everyone invest in space elevators, somehow that's not going to pan out. And then the economy's going to tank again. And again, not all recessions are completely horrible. Sometimes we get out of it in like 8 years, but there's always going to be a downturn every 8 years because we have to. Also, that's also natural. You know, everyone invested, let's say, in like VCR tapes. You know, like VHS is a new fad, and then new technology emerges. And you have CDs and MP3s. So naturally, those businesses and all the ancillary businesses are going to die. So, but we over-speculate over time because we assume this technology can never get any better, and then it's replaced, and so that entire sector goes under. And it's replaced, and then that grows, and that is replaced by another sector. So it's a cycle. You can't get out of it, but people don't know this exists, and that's the problem. And it's stupid. So it's a frustration for me. Where recessions, a recession is typically when your economy does not grow over 6 months. Then, it's been 5 years now for us since the recession hit. It's one of the worst that we're in currently. But it's not as bad as the Depression. Currently, right now, we're sitting at about 13% unemployment. The Great Depression at the time, if you include farmers, was 40% unemployment. If you look at Chicago in the 1930s, it's 50% unemployment. 1 in 2 people were unemployed. So yeah, I mean, we are bad, but it's not that bad. I mean, yes, there are still 30 million people unemployed currently, but we're talking about more than that during the Great Depression. Yeah, and it will be. The world is going to be different, and so you wonder, like, what are the different things that will change? I mean, maybe it'll be like electric cars. That is a new over speculation. Like, electric cars are emerging right now, right? So you'll see this growth over time of electric cars, and all of a sudden we'll realize that, nope, it's not electric cars. It's plug-in hybrids, and that's going to be new fad. So all the electric car businesses are going to go out. Or like everyone's going to invest in like Tesla electric cars, and that's going to fail miserably because something happens. And so, yeah. Over speculation is a B, and people just kind of forget that it happens. I mean, it might just be basic stock market over speculation. Like, that could probably happen. Look at Facebook. It happened with Facebook, just like instantly. Facebook sold for $80 on its first day because everyone assumed that Facebook would go up to like $150 in like overnight. And then when Facebook sold, the day it sold, when everyone had bought it for $80, the next day it dropped to like $23. Because people assumed it would get better and better and better, and it didn't. And so it's, again, if it's too good to be true, it is. Look at Apple. Apple grew. Steve Jobs is dead. Now Apple's going to start sinking because they don't have as much innovation because Steve Jobs really was Apple. So will they still have great products? Sure, but they're already not doing so well as they used to. I mean, the last year, the crap they've been putting out is just not good. And I've never been an Apple person, but, I mean, Apple went from $500 and they started to tank. Whereas Google's jumping to $800. And so, it's crazy. We'll see what happens with Google. How long can Google keep its rise? Because that's not going to stay forever. It can't. It just can't. Eventually, there'll be not internet, and there'll be like something else, and then all that money that Google has invested will not be able to compete, and then it'll fall. Because look at all the biggest empires in the world. I mean, remember Rome? Remember that? Yeah. 200 years of just great civilization. Did it last forever? No. And so even though it did last for a long time, nothing will last forever. Nothing will last forever because it will be replaced. So they'll innovate as long as they can, and then it'll fall. Different levels of unemployment or employment. There's full employment. That's slow. Pretty much everyone works. As everyone works as much as possible. The goal is full employment. This will never get realized just because it's impossible. Because everyone that works should work. But you will never have this because, especially in America, we have 350 million people. We'll never get this, but we want to have as high employment as possible. So, I mean, good employment for us is 6% unemployment. That's good. Like, we're happy with 6% unemployment because that's normal. No, there will be 6% of the population that will always be unemployed because our economy just can't keep up with the growth of the population. But we're okay with that.
Oh, sorry. But some of it's by like choice, right? The unemployment.
No.
No. Okay.
No. So unemployment is people unemployed that are looking for a job. That's unemployment. If you're not looking for a job, you're not unemployed. So even though we'll say, oh, I'm not employed right now, you're not employed. You're not unemployed. So there is a difference. Unemployment, when we look at the numbers, is people that choose not to work. Because if we measured unemployment, what about all the children? You know, like then our mass unemployment numbers would be like 60%. But because we only measure people that are actively looking for work, and that's actively looking for work, within the last 6 months. So there's actually specific parameters for unemployment. It's if you've been actively looking for work for the last 6 months, you're part of unemployment. Because eventually people quit looking for work. And that then changes our unemployment numbers. So when we look at unemployment, there are two factors that change it. It might be one, the unemployment rate is lower because people found jobs, or two, people gave up looking for jobs. So the unemployment number is always fuzzy. So whenever the unemployment numbers come out every month, we debate what it actually tells us because we really don't know. If people aren't in the workforce looking for jobs anymore, is it just because they found jobs, or just because they just quit? I mean, again, imagine trying to look for work for 6 months. It's frustrating, it's debilitating. And so you just stop. And then maybe you start up again in the future, and then unemployment will go up again. But it's not because people were fired, it's because people try to enter the job market again. So unemployment is a really funky number to play with. But it's interesting because it can always be interpreted. Bless you. Yeah, so again, you're actively looking for a job if you're unemployed. It's not just you don't work. Yeah, so and you're not retired either. So what are the types of employment? Frictional employment. People are out of work because they're temporarily between jobs. So again, college grads are frictional unemployment because now they can officially work, but they're unemployed. So they're trying to look for work. Or you just moved, and so you're looking for work. So you didn't get fired. You're just between jobs. That's frictional employment.
So does our frictional unemployment last for 6 months?
Not if you're laid off. Wait, what do you mean?
Like, say, well, I'm referring it back to like the grace period. Like, we just graduated, but we don't have a job from college, but we're looking for 6 months and we can't find anything.
Yeah, so pretty much a frictional. Yeah, so frictional unemployment will be measured within the last 6 months of your graduation to see if you are part of frictional unemployment. If not, then you just become part of the larger unemployment pool, where you just cannot find a job. But we do look at those numbers because we say, well, it's June. So did the numbers of unemployment go up because students just graduated and are now looking for work? Or is it up just because people have entered re-entered the workforce again? Another one is cyclical unemployment. So this is just because of consumer demand. So like ski resorts have cyclical demand. Santa Claus costume people have, Santa Claus workers have cyclical demand. So like you don't want to sit on Santa's lap in like May. So those guys are all out of work. But in November, December, they're all in work again. So cyclical. These are people that are technically getting laid off. So maybe steel workers also, housing, people that do like roofing. You don't have a lot of roofing in the winter months, and you have a lot of roofing in the summer months. Then there's seasonal. This is mostly farming. This could also include things like ski resorts. It just depends. I guess ski resorts are a better example of seasonal. under structural when the economy changes. So again, the best example is people that used to do cassette tape and VCR repair. That entire industry is gone for the most part because society changed, and so now you have like PC repair, and eventually that'll change, and then the guy that fixes cell phones, that will change with everyone has ear implanted phones. But society will change as structure changes. Like how many people can fix like a 1940 car? You're no longer a mechanic. Impressive. So, but overall, you just don't have that time of ability anymore. So you have structural employment because the economy has changed. So what happens with unemployment? On the individual, no income. They blame themselves. They're very sad. You like my drawing? It's pretty good, right?
You do that?
Yeah. It's impressive.
Yeah.
On the economy, loss of benefits. Again, the productivity is lost. The government, we lose our tax dollars.
When people get depressed, they can afford
A psychiatrist.
somebody.
Yeah. And so again, this is the problem we get of the sequester, is that if these people are laid off, there's no income, they can't buy things in the economy, the government won't get taxes. So this is why when you just cut government spending across the board, it's not a good thing for the economy. It's horrible for the economy. We forget that. It's horribly frustrating. But yeah, that's the business cycle. Let's move on to demand. So let's now start graphing stuff to some degree. There's a lot of writing here. Don't worry about so much of the writing. We'll get to the actual how to graph things in a bit.
So they're not going to ask us to graph something.
They won't ask you to graph something.
They'll ask us how to read.
How to read a graph. They might give you a multiple choice where they'll give you 4 graphs and be like, which of these is a supply graph? They might be like 1, 2, 3, 4, and is this supply, this supply, this supply, or this supply? Yeah, A, B, C, or D.
Yeah.
So something like that.
Okay.
Or they might be like, which represents a shift in supply? This, or this. And then you should know what a shift in supply is. So we'll talk about all this in a second. So the law of demand is simple. Let me just state this in the easiest way possible. As prices decrease, as prices decrease, consumers buy more. So another way to put it, here it's very simple. Equals lower demand. And then lower prices equals higher demand. That's the law of demand. As prices increase, people buy less. As prices decrease, people buy more. That's the law of demand.
So if demand changes, the price changes.
Nope. Not necessarily, because you have to do the whole supply and demand graph. Because the reason why is that, let's say here's demand, and here's a price. Let's say demand shifts. That doesn't necessarily change the price. So what you need is supply.
Okay.
And then you know if it shifts. If demand just shifts, that doesn't necessarily tell you anything. But if demand shifts and supply doesn't change, then price change. Because here, if supply also changed, then there is no price change. That's why it's very critical to make sure you understand that just a demand or one or the other, and that's all you know, and they don't tell you what happened to the other one, doesn't tell you anything. So it's scary to assume. And so, right, and then also on a graph, if this is your demand, and let's say at price A, or price, let's see, at $5, this quantity here, let's say 12, this is your quantity demanded. So quantity demanded is just how much is demanded at a specific price. That's the term quantity demanded. So demand and quantity demand are not the same. So if price changes, demand does not change. If price changes, quantity demanded changes. Because at $5, they want 12. But at $7, they only want 10. So quantity demanded changes when price changes. Cool with that? Okay. So factors that affect demand, substitution. Okay. Are you going to buy more of a good if the price of its substitute gets less? So let's say we're in a market for Pepsi, and the price of Coca-Cola or Coke goes down. What's going to happen to your demand for Pepsi? It's going to go down. So if the price of Coke goes down, the demand for Coke goes down because they're substitutes. So you're going to buy less of it. The same is true for income. If you make a lot more money, well, actually, let's say this. Let's say you're a poor college student. You're struggling right now. You know, you're trying to just make ends meet. So you're making some money here, and so currently you consume a lot of cup noodle. But let's say you start becoming a very lucrative doctor. So as your income goes up, what is going to happen to your demand for cup noodle? It's going to go down. And let's say steak dinners. As a college student, how many steak dinners are you going to be eating as a college student? Very few, unless you go to Pizza on Thursdays. Then it's always Thursday steak. But, because it's true, Thursday's always steak is my experience. But if you become wealthy, what happens to your demand for steak? Increases. So again, it's one of those things where your income will also impact what you buy. A cup of noodle, if you buy more of a product when your income drops, so if your income increases and you buy more of good A, then that product is a normal good. That means you buy more of it because it's a good. But if your income goes up and you buy less of product B, then that is an inferior good because you're buying cup of noodle because you're poor. Whereas if you're doing okay, you're going to buy more of it. That's a normal good. You're going to buy more of it. Okay. So here's a basic graph. So let's try and do this together. Actually, the combined effect is confusing. Let's ignore that one. But if price A increases, okay, what happens to the consumption of good A? It goes down. And, well, I need a lot of scenarios here. Let's say, assuming that your income goes up and your substitution goes down, and assuming that good A, I don't want to do this right now. Yeah. You don't guys have to know that anyway. Demand schedule, market demand schedule, don't worry about that. So demand curve. It curves down. Does everyone know why?
It depends on the quantity. No, I don't know why.
At $3 for pizza, how many people are going to want it? 50, not very many. At 50 cents, are a lot of people going to want pizza? At 50, just use common sense. At 50 cents, are people going to want pizza?
Yeah.
Yes, a lot of people. Thus, when prices decrease, quantity increases, or quantity demanded increases. Therefore, that's your demand curve. So, I mean, if you're not sure, just do the math. I mean, and you'll figure it out pretty quickly. Just do two scenarios. Just do pizza in your head. Would I buy pizza for $50? No. Would I buy pizza for 50 cents? Yes. Would a lot of people buy pizza for 50 cents? Yes. So that has to be here. There's my graph. So demand curve is always pointing down. So think down and demand is another way to do it. Down and demand. Demand points down. It's downward sloping.
Why is it all a curve?
Because this is the most simplistic form. A demand curve is really like this. And the supply curve is really like that. Because things aren't perfect. You're not perfectly going to have this like perfect for $3 X will buy, $2 people will buy X. It's like for $1.25, 123 people will buy, and so you have this curving over time. It's like a PPF. It's a little bit more like that in real life. Here, that's not the case. This is just for simplicity's sake. So, you asked, okay, so what happens when demand changes? A shift is when demand moves like this, from demand 1 to demand 2, or backwards from demand 1 to demand 3. Okay, so demand shift is when you actually physically change demand. So, what factors can cause a shift in demand is what we're going to talk about next. So, ceteris paribus means that all things equal. The reason why we have to do this is that if we say, well, if demand shifts, won't this also happen? Yes, in real life, other things will happen, but that becomes too complicated. It's like if I buy a car, but won't I also buy a new suit to go with my car, and therefore, yes, but what would happen if you just look at the purchase of the car? So ceteris paribus just means all other things equal, because otherwise there's just like a million factors and it gets confusing. So all other things equal, what will shift demand? First, income. Okay, we talked about this slightly before, but an income effect will change your demand for a good, a normal good and inferior good. And so I might actually have a chart for you in that packet I gave you guys to fill this all in. We'll make it easier for you. Oh yeah, and the chart says demand determinants. There's actually a place here where you guys can fill this all in. That way you guys have a place to do it. It's inside there. No, in the one that has Adam Smith on it today, the Adam Smith packet, there's a section here where you guys can fill it in. That way it's a little bit more chart-based. All right. Yep, demand determinants. So these are the factors that affect demand. First off, we have income. Okay, so looking at income here. So the basic idea is this idea of normal goods and inferior goods. You can just write down the definition there. But basically, a normal good. In a normal good, if income goes up, then what happens? For a normal good? Yeah. Quantity demanded, or demand increases as well, right? So if our incomes all go up, is everyone going to buy like a sports car? Sure, it's a normal good. If it's a inferior good and your income goes up, and actually I was telling in the packet I just gave you, there's a section here called demand determinants where you can actually fill it in. So it should be in the packet. Yeah, there's a page in there called demand determinants. There's a chart. So if it's an inferior good and your income goes up, what happens? What happens to demand? It decreases. Demand goes down. And by the way, when I say up, I mean demand shifts to the right, and when I say demand decrease, it shifts to the left. So it really should be a right shift and a left shift. The reason why is this. Here's demand. Let's say this is demand for a cup of noodles or steak. If our income goes up, which direction is demand going to shift? To the right. To the right. So demand shifts that way to D2. If our income decreases, it'll shift to the left. That's D3. Okay, that's income effect. So again, if you want in the future, you can provide examples here in this section here, but you have areas, for example, just to practice if you want in the future. So that's income effect. Everyone good with that so far? Okay, next one. Consumer expectations. Consumer expectations, that's the bottom one you have on your list there. Consumer expectations. So, consumer expectations is this. If you believe that the price of a product is going to drop in the future, so price will drop in the future, what is going to happen to your demand for a product today? You're going to have decreased demand, or a leftward shift of demand. Because are you going to buy more if the price is going to drop? No way. If Toyota's going to start selling hybrids for like $10, I'm not buying one today. I'm buying one next week. And the same is true of the opposite. If you know that the price of gasoline is going to increase in the future, what's going to happen to demand for gasoline? You're going to buy more today. You're going to bring barrels of gas. You're going to bring barrels and fill them up at the gas station. It's going to go up more soon. But, yeah. That's the basic idea. If you believe that prices will go up or down, then you will change accordingly. So consumer expectations will affect demand. And again, it'll shift to the right or it'll shift to the left. Everyone good with that so far? Population. This is not on your chart. This is pretty simple. If there's more people in your population, are more people going to buy? Therefore, demand increases. That's pretty basic. Consumer tastes, that's trends on your graph. That's the top one. For example, what's really popular right now? iPad. So the trends for tablets are going to go up if the trend is up. Demand for stuff will go up when the trend is high. And then let's say it turns out that Apple's been murdering Chinese people and using their blood to power iPads. What happens to iPads? Decreases. The trend goes down. So it's a whole issue of popularity, trends, consumer taste, and advertising. If it's popular, it goes up. If it's bad, it goes down. Good so far in those. I think substitutes and complementary on the next slide. I was right. These are related goods. So, a complement are goods that are bought together. Ski and ski boots. Substitutes are things that are replacements of each other. So, skis and snowboards. So, here's the example I like to use. Milk and cereal. If the price of good A goes up, what happens to the demand of good B if they're complements? If the price of, here I'll just use not A, if the price of milk goes up, what happens to the demand for cereal? It goes down because you're going to buy less cereal if milk is expensive. You might end up eating, I don't know, oatmeal with water. No, that's a cheaper alternative. So those are complements. And the same is true of the opposite. If the price of milk drops, then what happens to the demand for cereal? Yeah, you buy way more Captain Crunch because it's cheaper now. You can afford more. So the opposite is true for complements. Skis and ski boots, the same thing. Gas and cars, the same thing. Substitutes. If the price of, let's go with Coke, goes up, then what happens to the demand for Pepsi? It goes up. They have a positive relationship, right? And the same as the opposite. If the price of Coke goes down, demand for Pepsi goes down. So again, complements have a negative relationship, not negative in a bad sense, but negative just in a polar opposite sense. And then substitutes have a positive relationship. If you guys understand that, you should be good. Cool with price of related goods. And again, here's our demand for cereal. If the price of milk goes down, what happens to the demand for cereal? If the price of milk goes down, what happens to the demand for cereal? Shifts to the right, because we buy more cereal. Yay. Remember, left is down. So this is why it's confusing. I always just say, if you're shifting, you shift to the left or the right. Always remember, right.
Oh, my econ teacher used to, you know, Nancy's song, to the left, but all you think from the box to the left, bad.
That will work, I guess. I'll use that with my class. So everyone good with shifting of demand? You don't have to worry about elasticity of demand. This is not important.
Is that going to be on the 10?
Elasticity? No.
Yeah, it's not.
No. I mean, elasticity is pretty simple, though. I guess I'll just briefly explain it. This is elastic, and this is inelastic. And you guys should probably draw this somewhere, because there is a difference. Elastic goods are goods where quantity changes because of price. You have a lot of change due to price. Okay, you have a lot of change due to price. So one really good example, let's say, is weekend travel. Okay, if you're going to travel on the weekends. If the prices of plane tickets go from $10, let's say they're currently at $10, then let's say 50 people will buy it. But if the price of plane tickets drop to, let's say, $4, then are a lot of people more going to buy it? Yes, let's say 200 people buy it. So the basics of elastics, it's a good that's sensitive to price change. It's very sensitive to price change.
Doesn't have to do with substitutes?
Nope.
What has to do with, what are inelastic and elastic substitutes?
They're not substitutes. They're two different goods. So like plane tickets, weekend travel is inelastic. Or elastic. Because do you have to go on vacation on the weekend? No. But if the price drops, are you going to go on vacation on the weekend? Yes. So usually these are not necessary goods. These are usually very elastic, very flexible. These are not required or necessary goods. This could be an extra car, a steak dinner. This could be stuff that you do not need. These are mostly your wants. An inelastic good is goods that are not receptive to change, like air travel on a weekday. Typically, if you're flying on a weekday, are you flying for work, right? So if prices change on a weekday, is that going to mean that a lot more people are going to travel? Probably not. Maybe a small margin of people will change their flights accordingly, but the majority of people still won't travel because they already had to travel for work, or they are not going to travel because it doesn't make a difference. There's not desirable enough. So in that same scenario, let's say the price dropped from $10. Well, 50 people are going to buy. But if on weekday air travel it dropped, let's say $4, well, now 55 people are going to buy. It's a very small change. So an elastic good is very receptive to a change in price. An inelastic good is not very receptive to a change in price. And you can have a purely elastic good where your good is like this. And it doesn't matter what the price is, are people going to buy it forever? Yeah, that's a purely elastic good. And you have a purely inelastic good. It doesn't matter what the good is or what the price is, the same amount of people are going to buy it regardless. So like, my blood. Let's say I have the most unique blood and only I can have it. So it doesn't matter what the price is, I'm going to have to buy my blood. There's nothing I can do about it. But let's say inelastic good, let's say it's water. It doesn't matter what the price is. People will buy it regardless of that price. If you shift it up or down, it doesn't matter.
So you can explain this in terms of substitutes, though.
How would you?
Like gasoline. Okay. So like gasoline is an inelastic good because there's very few substitutes for it.
I see what you're saying.
Ethanol.
Yes.
Vegetable oil, electricity.
Sure. So you can argue that a good is inelastic because there are fewer substitutes, but typically the most base definition is just that it's just receptive to price. But it might be receptive to price because there aren't very many substitutes to it. So that's one way to explain why that might be a substitute. That's not always the case. You can have lots of substitutes, but the brand loyalty makes it so that you really care about one product or another. Thank you. But you can argue in that sense.
That, the teacher I'm working with right now, that's how he explains it.
As that they're just substitutes. And again, that's not a wrong way to teach it, but ultimately the most based way is that it's a product that's receptive to price change. That's
then on the other side you could argue like if gas prices did go up, then like maybe people just wouldn't drive. Like they'd take the bus or ride a bike or whatever.
Right. And again, I guess that would be true, but then the reality is that's not always the case. So that's true, but it can get more confusing in that sense because that's not true for all products. It's easy to, if you're going to use an example of gasoline, then yes, that's a great way to explain it, but that's not necessarily true for all elastic and inelastic goods.
Okay.
Yeah, so I would always caution with that explanation. I say it's always a reception of price because that's really what it is. Because you can't graph substitutes directly on one graph, but I can graph price change.
Okay. Yeah.
And because really inelastic is this line. A flatter line, a more horizontal line is more elastic. A more horizontal, vertical line, that's more inelastic.
Right.
So that's just what it comes down to. And that doesn't tell me whether or not there are substitutes. That's implied.
How you would say it is if it's a straight up and down, there are
No substitutes?
Like living, like water for living.
Mm-hmm.
He says it's completely inelastic.
Sure. And I think that is, I mean, that, again, you can make that argument for most things. I think the problem is that when you start struggling to find the examples for all goods that are elastic and inelastic, then it's fine. So in terms of explanation, that's fine. In terms of definition, it's response to price. Yeah.
Okay.
So it's a good example. I wouldn't I would stray away as for definition.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So there you go. Don't worry about factors elastic. I mean, again, like, yeah, let's get past that all. And then we have time to do supply, and then we'll do supply. Supply is not the opposite. People just assume it is the opposite. It's usually the same rules again. Okay, according to the law of supply, again, in this case, if price increases, quantity supplied decreases. If price falls, quantity supplied falls. So instead of a downward sloping graph, you have a upward sloping graph. So that's supply. The best way to do it is that you take an S and you just stretch it out. It's pretty much an upward sloping graph, so that always helps. But yeah, it's an upward sloping graph. The reason why is, if you're a business, this is a supply curve for businesses. It's not a supply curve for people that are buying. If you're a business, do you want to sell your product for the lowest price possible or the highest price possible? Highest. So if the product is, let's say, $2, and you're selling iPads, how many iPads do you want to sell at $2? Maybe you'll sell like 2, just because. But if you can sell an iPad for, let's say, $300, are you going to want to sell more iPads? Yeah, because for you, the issue is profit. There, you're going to sell 1,000 of them. So the issue is profit. Okay, remember, the supply curve is a line for businesses. Demand curve is the line for us. We just put them on the same curve. But sometimes people get confused, like, well, why would you produce more? Well, if the consumers wouldn't want that. Yeah, but it's not the consumer. It's the supplier. It's a factor of how much you're selling it for. Supply is the selling price. Demand is the purchasing price. Yeah, so if you can see it that way, then now it makes a lot more sense. Because people always say, well, why would I want to buy it at $500? You don't. I want to sell it at $500. So if you can draw the distinction in your mind every time looking at these graphs, it makes a lot more sense. Because people do look at it and like, I don't understand why these are not the same. It's because there's two different interests. And that's what supply and demand is all about. Competing interests.
What was it that you said for supply is for?
The selling price.
The seller.
Seller?
Yeah, the seller. It's the selling price, and demand is for the consumer. So they're two separate graphs that we put on one to show interactions between the two, but they're two completely different interests. And one is for selling price, one is for buying price. And again, quantity supplied, the same rule, quantity supplied at a certain price. We just talked about that for blah, blah, blah. Supply schedule, same thing. It goes upwards. So, and everyone knows why now. The higher the price, the more you want to sell. So again, for pizzas, you're going to sell only 1,050 cents because why would you want to sell pizzas for 50 cents? You're not going to make very much money. But holy crap, people are buying it for $3. I'm going to make 3,500 pizzas. I'm going to make so much money off of that. So it's a factor of how much money do you want to make. You want to sell at the highest price possible because you want to make the most money. Elasticity supply is, again, not very responsive to change in price. Again, elastic supply is also very selective change in price. It's the exact same rule as the other elasticity, so I'm not going into too much detail. Typically, the elasticity is a function of time. It is less elastic in the short term, or it's inelastic in the short term and elastic in the long run. Because in the short term, here's supply. If I'm growing vegetables, can I change how many vegetables I can grow in a short amount of time? No, it's impossible. But in the long run, I can grow as much vegetables as you want because I can grow more. I can change my factory. So for us, elasticity is a factor of how quickly we can output. If we can't output very much in the short term, that's really going to affect our elasticity. If we can output a lot, but we can't output however much you want in the long term, because it's a function of changing your industry. So, and also technology will make you produce unlimited amounts in the future. Cost of production. Marginal labor. Marginal product of labor is just how much will it cost for each additional unit. That's the marginal product of labor. Or marginal product is just, so marginal product is a term of how much it costs per additional unit. Marginal product of labor is how much will it cost for each additional person hired. So just marginal is just for each additional. In this case, product, how much for each additional product produced. Does it cost 3 more, 4 more every time you produce an additional? Marginal product of labor is how much does that each additional person produce. Returns is how much you're going to make, blah, 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 I have to know that. You show the different kind of costs in a business. Fixed cost is costs that never change. So for example, if you buy a business in Claremont and you pay rent, that cost will likely never change, or it'll change a little bit every month, but you can set your clock to it. Okay, that's a fixed cost. Variable cost changes with your production. The reason why it changes is that your one business will become more efficient as you hire more or less people. So that variable cost changes depending on how many people you hire, how much your materials cost. For example, if you buy in bulk, will your product be cheaper to produce? Let's say you're making burgers. If you go and buy the celery from, I don't know, Vaughn's, your cost will be much more than if you buy your celery from Costco, because your product cost is much less. And so variable costs change if you buy in bulk versus if you buy in small quantities. So variable costs change depending on how much is produced.
Can you relate that to an adjustable rate on the mortgage?
Sort of. I mean, it's the same basic idea, but variable costs typically changes based on how much you are producing. It's an economy of scale. And so if I'm only producing, let's say, 5 burgers, then I can only really buy 5 tomatoes, and therefore those individual tomatoes will cost me a lot per unit that I buy. But if I make, let's say, 5,000 burgers, I'm going to go to the farm and be like, look, I'm buying like 5,000 tomatoes worth. So can you give me a better price? Yeah. So the more that I produce, the cheaper it gets. Also, if I hire workers, if I hire one person, that person may be able to only make, let's say, 500 burgers on their own, because they have to put the burger together, they have to then put the bun, they have to put the cheese, put the lettuce, put the tomatoes. If I hire one more person, I could probably make 800 burgers, because now I have someone differentiating. Then I have another one, and someone else specializing. So your cost will actually go down if you get more efficient, based on how much you produce. Adjustable rate mortgage is not necessarily the same, because that's just an interest rate. So in the sense that it's adjustable, yes, it will change over time depending. But for a variable cost, what's changing is the actual cost per unit produced. It might be a factor of efficiency. It's usually a factor of efficiency, but it's also a factor of how much is being produced. The more you produce, the cheaper things are. Total cost is you just add those all up together. Marginal cost is the cost of just producing one more. So again, if you produced one more burger, how much would that cost? Well, you have to buy one more tomato. You have to pay an additional hour to that one guy, so is it worth it? And sometimes it might be like, oh yeah, actually producing one more burger will only cost us 13 cents. But it maybe if that you have to buy another tomato because you have one extra burger left to make, it might actually cost you 35 cents because you still have to buy that one tomato and you don't use all of it. So it just depends. If you produce 4 more burgers, then yeah, it'd be 12 cents again. So it just depends. Economies of scale. Marginal revenue is how much you make for additional unit. For each additional unit that you produce, how much more money you're going to make, that's marginal revenue. Usually it's the same because you sell all your products at the same price, but that's not necessarily the case because this sometimes changes over time. And lastly, let's do shifts in supply. So what will cause shifts in supply? You guys can turn to the other page with shifts in supply determinants. What's going to change your costs? First is resource prices, cost of production. Those are called input costs. So if the cost of production goes up, if your cost of production is going to go up, are you going to be able to produce more or less as a seller? Less. So it's going to shift to the left. It's going to shift downwards. Only because instead of being able to produce more goods, raw steel costs a lot more, so you can't produce 10,000 pieces of doors anymore. You can only produce 8,000 because the cost of steel went up. Okay, so that's input cost changing. The same is true of the opposite. If raw steel goes down in price, then you can produce more. So this is always changing in the economy depending on purchasers. The next is technology. This is pretty basic. If technology improves, they typically decrease costs and increase supply. So for example, before we were making cars by hand, it took about 14 and a half hours and cars cost like $1,800. Eventually, technology and the assembly line made us produce cars in 1.5 hours. The price of the car dropped to $400. Okay, so because technology made things better, typically prices drop and we can produce more. Teaching econ is actually pretty fun when you have more than 3 hours to teach most of it. Because the examples you get to teach with your kids, you get to play with examples and let's do econ in your everyday life. Kids hate econ unless it makes sense to them. So you have to do all the analogies like, what if McDonald's did this? What if you were working? If you owned a business, what you would do? So econ definitely lends itself to simulation and a lot more student engagement because otherwise they'll hate it. It's not fun when you're just telling them stuff and they're like, okay. And we always try to do all the simulations and give like 90 examples, and then they're like, "Oh, now I get it." Okay, for all of you emo kids, if Hot Topic did this, like, "Oh, now I get it." The T-shirts with the skulls. Yes, I would buy less of that. Other reasons why supply would shift: taxes and subsidies. If the government just gives you money, are you going to buy more or less? Are you going to produce more or less? More. So a government subsidy will increase supply because the government's going to pay for you, is going to, let's say, buy your machinery. You have more money now. So a subsidy will increase supply. If the government taxes you, what will that do to the supply? Decrease, because like, oh, we're going to put a carbon tax, you are polluting the environment. So, oh, we have to pay for those taxes now. We can't produce as much anymore. So taxes will actually reduce. Regulation usually raises costs as well. So regulation is a form of a tax, but you can just throw regulation in that tax box there. But it depends. Regulation can sometimes increase, it can sometimes decrease. Usually it increases costs. Sometimes we deregulate though, and therefore costs go down. Like, you can kill as many birds as you want this year. Pollution doesn't matter. Other factors, the global economy. So really, this one, global economy, it's number of producers, or number of sellers rather. If the number of sellers increases because you have a global economy now, what's going to happen to the graph? If more sellers begin producing in a global economy, which way will the supply graph shift? I'll give you an example. Okay, so before, here's the sellers. Before, Americans used to only buy cars made by Ford, Chrysler, GM in America. And then Germany and Japan began selling cars in America. So what happened to the supplies of cars in America?
The supplies of cars stayed the same.
What happened to the supplies of cars in America? Okay, so I didn't say what happened to the supply of American cars. It went up because the overall amount of sellers increased. Okay, so that is tricky, but that's the basic idea. Because the wording is important. What happened to the supply of cars in the American market? It's not what happens to the supply of cars and what happens to the supply of American cars. Because they could trick you. You could trick your kids with that all the time. You can say, so if there were 9,000 more German cars in America, what happened to the supply of American cars? Nothing. What happened to the supply of cars in America? It increased. Or, what happened to the supply of cars in America? Unknown. You don't know what the direct impact was. It might not have changed it at all. It might have changed it quite a bit. They might have chosen to sell less, but you don't know. And so, that's the number of sellers. The other is expectations. If you know that people are going to be willing to pay higher prices in the future, are you going to sell more now or later? Are you going to sell more now or less now? Less, because you know that people are going to pay more in the future. So, for example, roofing. Okay, people tend to pay more to fix their roofs in winter times because their houses are leaking. Okay, so are you going to charge? Are you going to try to sell more roofing jobs or be more available during the winter season or the summer season? In the winter season, because you want to be more available because that's when you know that you can charge the most. But in the summer season, you're going to take it off. And, you will do jobs during the summer, but you're not going to get paid as much during the summer. So you're actually going to go on vacation because they call you, be like, you know what, I'm unavailable, I'm on vacation because I know, honestly, when your roof starts leaking in the winter, I can actually charge you more. So that's how that works. So future expectation and prices. I'm actually going to make myself intentionally unavailable so that when the winter comes around, your roof is leaking. I say, oh, you really need it now? Well, if it's now, I have to charge you a premium because it's quick. And so they'll do that. A number of suppliers in global economy, same thing. Yeah, that's supply. Last session we'll talk about putting that together, but it's pretty much the same thing. We'll talk about it on Wednesday. Wednesday is our last session, so I will cover the rest of economics. I will give you some stuff for California history. If there's anything else in particular you want me to cover, email me ahead of time so I can just plan for that. But it's my understanding that you guys just want me to cover the rest of econ. You guys are good with US and world.
Are you done with government?
I can do more government if you like, if there's anything in particular you want for government. But I gave you guys the foundations of government. I gave you guys the Enlightenment. I gave you guys Federalist Papers. I've given you most of it already. Let me go back and see if there's anything else I need to cover in particular for government. There might be a few more things that might come up, but I've given you most of it. So let me just double check government one more time to see if there's anything else.
Is there a diagnostic test for government?
No, it's a combination of government and econ, but I can get you guys a test also for just government.
Okay,
Yeah, so I'll actually post that tonight. So just double check the link tonight for the government one that I already sent out, and then I'll include a link for a test for that as well. Cool. All right, guys. I'll see you guys on Wednesday. Make sure you guys are studying.
I should get an email by the end of the day.
Actually, I sent it out already.
Okay.